Good morning. It's like to take places, please. Welcome to the Napa Valley Wine Library's 28th Annual Wine Seminar. Titled Napa Valley, Alta California, and the Wine Legacy of Each State. Our seminars are cooperative efforts. We would like to first thank Nvwl, one of our founding wineries, for the beautiful setting and their sponsorship in setting up today's program. Wine glasses, thanks to the Napa Valley Vintners. Napa Valley Wine Library is in on lunch. The speaker's time and wine is all complimentary. We'll thank them. The program is a keynote address by a wine maven and longtime friend, Darryl Cordy, followed by a panel of distinguished vendors discussing their wines. There will be one break to refill or exchange glasses. We ask that you help by giving our UC Davis volunteers room to work. Incidentally, our UC Davis volunteers include 3 master's students in viticulture and enology and 2 seniors in the same department. Their participation has been sponsored by generous wine library members. To get us started, I'm introducing Gilles Duchambourg. Gilles has helped us out, put together the last several seminars and acted as an expert moderator. He has a long history with wine, and once he overcame his investment banking career, he dedicated himself to full-time wine education, including his own, becoming a master sommelier in 2000. He will introduce you to the rest of our guests and lead us through what looks to be an exceptional program. And thank you for your support of the Napa Valley Wine Library's Weekend for Wine. We hope to see you at the tasting tomorrow at Silverado. Gilles?
Thank you, Caroline. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. And what a better place to start the weekend, the historical Nvwl, and talking about a theme of the discovery of the New World and the introduction of vines here. And we're covering a lot of things this morning. Let me give you the quick overview of the day. We're first going to be I'm going to do a quick introduction on the sort of history of California very briefly, just to set the theme for today's wine tasting. And we have some very unusual, interesting wines. We'll be some of the first people to taste some of these wines. Starting with the Mission Grape, which I'll talk about. And then we'll be tasting some fortified wines, thanks to Darryl Cordy, some very historical wines from wineries that have now disappeared, and vineyards hopefully who haven't disappeared from the late 19th century. So it's going to be a travel through time, going back to Spain's arriving and discovery to the New World, and then on to the spread of the vine through South America, Mexico, of course. And because of the influence of Mexico on the California wine industry, after the introduction of the 3 Mission vines that you have on your tasting mat, we have a white Mission from Baja. We have a sparkling rosé País, which is what the Mission is called in Chile, the Torres family. And then we have one of the very few still red wine Mission from Napa Valley, from the Henry family. So George and Mike Henry will be talking about their project and their historical ranch and their connection to the history of California from their family. I'll be briefly mentioning something about the País in Chile after the keynote speak from Darryl Cordy. On my right, Oscar Renteria, 3rd generation, I would say, Mexican-American. I'll introduce him as we get there, to first really Mexican family to go from the Bracero movement to vineyard management company to owning vineyards and making their own wine in California. So he'll be telling us his story. And then we'll have a little break, because we have more wines for you. It's a surprise. You can go and enjoy the wonderful Francis Ford Coppola's part of his collection on moving images. Next door in the museum, a little bathroom break, we'll be setting up for the last flight, which will be the historic wine styles of Mission, mostly fortified, sweet, excellent, unique wines in the styles of Madeira, Vin Nvwl, and these are from the collection or the recommendation of Darryl Corti, who I'll be introducing in a minute. So that's kind of our plan, and then after that, we'll obviously go to lunch in the new tank room. Okay, so that's the plan for today. I thought I would just start by quickly, before introducing Darryl, a quick little background so everybody remembers that the Spanish came here around 1521, and in fact in 1524 there was an edict which forced Cortes to plant 1,000 vines for each 100 native on the land grants that were given by New Spain at the time as part of this repartimiento or part of the grants. By 1531, King Carlos V of Spain asked that each vessel to the New World that should carry vines with them. So he commanded that. By 1597, the mission of Santa Maria de las Paras, which is now Casa Madera Winery, was created in Mexico. So the oldest winery in the Americas is in Mexico, if you ever get that quiz question at the dinner. Of course, the Jesuits then started bringing spreading the viticulture, the vines, in the 1670s, the Jesuits to Baja. Afterwards, of course, maybe Darryl will talk about, there was protectionism edicts by King Charles II, because of course they were making great wines in the New World and the Spanish didn't like the competition. But of course, when Pizarro had gone south in about 1531 and 1534 and defeated the Incas, he planted vines and brought vines to Peru and Chile and Argentina. 1550 is really one of the dates where we think Chile and the Argentinian wine industry really developed. And of course, because of their isolation away from Spanish control and even the control within Mexico, they were able to expand their vineyards without the restrictions of the Mexicans in Spain. And of course, economic factors, the cost of importation and the difficulty of transport had a big role over that. As you know, even in the early days of California, if you wanted to get your wines to the East Coast, how would you do it? By boat around South America. No Panama Canal, no transcontinental railroad. What did the wine taste like when it got there? Well, it took a while for the New Yorkers to realize we were making great wines in California. And that's because of this history. In preparing for this presentation, I was doing a little bit of research and trying to figure out when was the first wine made in California. And I came across a couple of very interesting different facts that I wanted to share with everybody. So we know that in the 1540s, the Mexican, by the Spanish Franciscan priest, brought vines here. 1620, we know the first vines were planted in Baja, but we're not including Baja in California today. By the 16th century, Chile and Argentina. And I found out that there was a mission in what is now New Mexico, the mission by the Rio Grande Valley, the Senecru mission near San Antonio, and the Pilaro mission that did plant vine in 1629. So really the question of when were the first wine made in the continent of what is now the United States, it would have been in New Mexico, and maybe Darryl Corti will give us another story later on, I'm not sure. Of course, we know the first vines were planted in San Diego in 1769 by Father Filippo Serra, the first mission in Alta California. But since we're here in Napa Valley, and this is for the Napa Wine Library, we always like to refer back to a little bit to the history of Napa. And as you know, the history of Napa comes first from Sonoma. And when Father Jose Altamira decided they couldn't make, the only mission where they couldn't make wine in California was where? San Francisco, of course, because of the wonderful fog that we have. And so they decided to cross the Frontera del Norte, the Puerta Dorada, or the Golden Gate, or the Golden Door, and went to what they call the Contra Costa del Norte Este, with Petaluma and Vallejo there, and they founded what they called the Asistencia. They weren't actual missions, but they were farmlands that could bring goods and services and provide food for the missions. And even it was against the will of the Spanish church and the authority, Father Jose Altamira set up on the 4th of July, interesting date, you would say. 1823, the mission in Sonoma, from bringing vines from actually the mission of San Jose. So we think they first planted vines in 1817 in what we call the North Coast. And maybe the first wine was made by 1821. But who else was around on the north coast of California in those days? The Russians, correct. And has anybody been to Fort Ross? I'm sure you have. And do the Russians drink a little bit from time to time? We have a UC student from Russia here, that's why. And of course, the Russians did bring vines, and they brought them from Peru to California. And we, according to this, they brought them around the same time. The Russians in 1811, Rossiya, or what we call Fort Ross, they were raising crops and everything for their Alaska fur operation, and we think they also made wine by 1823. So it's basically a dead heat of who first made wine in Alta California, or in this part, North Coast, either the Russians or the Spanish missionary. Anyway, this is just to get your mind going and thinking back at these great times, and we have fascinating panelists. They'll tell us their history and their relationship to Spain, to the mission, and everything else. And of course, secularization in 1833, after the Mexican independence from Spain in 1821, created the boom after the gold rush and bringing General Vallejo's vines up here for George Young. And that was the beginning of the Napa wine time. So after this little introduction, I'd like to introduce my great friend Darrell Corti of Corti Brothers, Sacramento. He is a third-generation Californian from San Francisco. I sent him an article on the País grape. País is also what we call the mission. Mission has many different names. Its original name in Spain is Listan Prieto. It's sometimes known as Criolla Chica, sometimes Mission, sometimes País. It comes from Castilla-La Mancha. And I sent him this article because he's very well known for introducing white truffles to America, the first aceto balsamico tradicionales, and of course his family is from Genoa. And it was in Spanish, and I said, sorry, Darrell, maybe you could read a little Spanish. And of course his reply is he did get a university degree from the University of Madrid. So his Spanish is muy bien, gracias, amigo. Grazie mille, signore, doctore. So let me introduce Darrell Corti of Corti Brothers to speak today, our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Gilles. Can I speak like this, or do you want me to speak in the... With this thing? Okay. All right. Well, Gilles has taken a lot of fire out of my talk. On the other hand, we came here to taste wine, we came here to talk. Because if you want to deal with the history of wine in California, then you're dealing with a lot of soi-disant history, or history that's probably not historical. Just to correct Gilles, just a little bit. The first planting of grapes in what we call the United States happened in 1538 in South Carolina by the Spaniards who landed there before they found their sites in Florida. So we have had wine for a long time in the United States. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of wine because what happens is that every time we plant grapes, it takes time for them to grow. And by the time they grew on the East Coast, they were either wiped out by disease or by riots or war or whatever. So, it's not nice to talk badly about one's grandmother, yet we do. The grandmother in question is the mission variety. Long possibly the most maligned variety in California. And I mean both Californias. Winemaking history. It has been maligned from its earliest written history in the New World. Since it was one of the first varieties planted in the New World, what was the other variety planted in the New World? Anybody? Muscat. Muscat of Alexandria, called Muscatel. The two varieties that were brought to California. So, remember, we used to make a lot of Muscat in California, a lot of Muscatel. We don't anymore. Since it was one of the first varieties planted in the New World, was the other Muscatel, it has been called exquisite and execrable. Called excellent due to the fact that if its wine or no wine was the case, then its wine was excellent. Execrable, when someone having some wine experience tasted it, very low in acid, very low in color and flavor, and thought execrable, I guess it depends on who you are, where you are, and what your expectations are. For a long time, Mission was an unknown parentage. Wixon, the second professor of agriculture at the University of California at Berkeley, called it a seedling of Monica, the Sardinian variety. Others called it other names, incorrect ones, until 2007, when it was found to be identical to Listan Prieto, now a very minor variety from Andalusia, in fact, the Share district, and currently only planted on the Canary Islands. Remember, even though the Canary Islands are Spanish, they weren't inhabited until the 1600s, the early part of the 1600s, because the Spaniards had never gone that far. It took that incident in 1492 to make them look outside. This fact has helped the rather precarious viticulture of the Canary Islands, which are a series of volcanic islands, and has brought some luster to the tarnished reputation of Mission. Known by two other names at least, País in Chile and Criolla in Argentina, both areas where it had been taken, there may be some clonal differences in the variety which we are exploring. The color of both País and Criolla is much better than the color of Mission in California, leading me to believe that there may be differences that merit looking at. In the very south of Chile, where viticulture first started, remember, when you went around the United States and around South America and came up on the Pacific coast, the first port in Chile is the port called Concepcion. That's where the first vineyards were planted, in the south of Chile. So what we know today as the vineyards in the north of Chile didn't exist. In the very south of Chile, where viticulture first started, it remains a localized variety, normally used to make a wine made by small winemakers, home winemakers, called pipeño, since what they made was the pipa, or barrel of wine, for family or local use. When Miguel Torres first started producing it about 2012, I wrote 2014 was 2012, and producing it with very modern criteria, País or Mission, his first wine, changed. These very old vineyards planted to País and also Carignan have become better thought of and have now created a small revolution in the national production of Chile. In the southern regions of Chile, Itata and Biobío, these old vineyards are now repaying the patient toil of their owners. They used to sell for practically nothing, for pennies. Curiously, in California, we have had a love-hate relationship with Mission. The Hilgardia Bulletin that came out in 1944, recommending or not recommending grape varieties for planting in California, Mission was recommended for certain regions, for certain wine types. This in juxtaposition to other varieties which were more famous in their native countries for production of the same style of wine, namely fortified wine. In 2018, we tend to forget that California in 1955, you can all remember 1955, can't you? Produced 35 million gallons of fortified wine and presumably sold it The current production of this wine type, sometimes based exclusively on mission, is now a drop in the bucket. But vineyardists and winemakers are, if nothing else, contrarians, strong-headed, stubborn, and sometimes lucky. It appears that mission is ripe for rejuvenation. The trouble with this is there is very little mission out there. In California's official reports, the grape acreage reports, there are a total of 409 acres, when in the 1980s there were more than 1,800. What is available is sometimes in mixed plantings of old heritage vineyards or plantings of venerable old age that at one time sold for pennies. In the same official reports, the average price paid for mission grapes is $289.37 a ton. That's 10 times less than average grapes in the Napa Valley. So obviously it's not a profitable grape variety. Of course, there are exceptions to these reports. A comparable scenario is that with Mataro, another maligned variety, now more famous as Mourvèdre. John Parducci once told me Mataro, well, we wouldn't pay $50 a ton to crush it. How times change. No matter how you look at it, wine is fashion and goes in and out of fashion. This morning we're going to take a look at several iterations of mission. We'll taste a mission pressed white from Baja California, from Bodega Santo Tomas in Ensenada. Interestingly, this winery has a connection to the Napa Valley. In the late 1960s, early 70s, Dmitry Chalachev, son of Andrei, was the winemaker for Bodega Santo Tomas. We will taste a sparkling mission, rather País from Chile, that has made a very unexpected mark from the windscape of Chile. We will taste other Napa Valley wines from other Iberian varieties, Albarino and Mission itself, grown here. Then another variety, Verdejo, grown in a singular area in the center north of Spain. It has nothing to do with the other slightly similar sounding variety, Verdelho, a Portuguese one, but is famous for making the wine of Rueda, which in its classical version is called Dorado, and is a floor-grown wine, similar to the wine of the Jura in the Franche-Comté. It is a variety which grows in a hot, arid summer and cold winter area, which we might well take heed of. Interestingly, a new online publication of FMS at UC Davis describes that from microsatellite analysis of Sauvignon, which is Traminer, which is the grape variety grown in the Franche-Comté, that it, Sauvignon, is one parent of either full or half siblings with Sauvignon Blanc. The other varieties, Chenin Blanc, Gruner Veltliner, Petit Mansin, Rauschle, Sylvaner, Trousseau, Verdes, Verdejo, and Verdelho da Madeira, which is the Verdelho we have in California. We will then taste two Napa Valley wines from a family winery of the very important group of vineyard workers from Mexico, who are the embodiment of the relationship between the California wine industry and its success. If we don't have workers, we don't have grapes, we don't have wine. Then we will taste four wines made solely for mission, but made as the variety was famous for, as Angelica. This wine type of fortified wine was said to have taken its name from having been made in Los Angeles. It may have. History is silent as to its origin. It was famous there, as were the Mission vineyards. But this area, the area around Los Angeles, can rightly be called the birthplace of California wine. Los Angeles was already famous for its wine before the discovery of Napa and Sonoma. In California and now in Baja California, the variety Mission takes its name from the fact that it was the variety planted at the missions founded with the first one at San Diego in 1769. The myth Junipero Serra planting a vineyard at San Diego in 1769 is just that, a myth. The city, or the mission of San Diego, was founded on July the 14th of 1769. You tell me how you can keep vine cuttings damp, cool, and land plowed to receive them in July in San Diego. Actually, a friend, an old friend who's now gone, Roy Brady, wrote an article in that massive tome that was from the University of California Press and Sotheby, called The Book of California Wine, where he actually reasonably gives us the date of the production of the first wine in California, which is probably 1773 at Mission San Juan Capistrano. Because as Gilles said, the Spanish government supplied everything for the missions. The missionaries needed to make wine because most of the time they lacked wine. And if you don't have wine, you can't say Mass. You need both elements, bread and wine. Before this date, before 1769, the variety had its home in that other part of California, Baja California, which in the bureaucratic world of the Spanish Empire was divided into Baja California, Sur and Norte, was divided in half. The establishment of vineyards and the production of wine there was due to the extraordinary work of the Jesuit order who founded the 18 missions in Baja California. The Franciscan order who took over from the Jesuits in 1768, after the forced expulsion of the Jesuits, became known as the first viticulturists. But they were the second. The Jesuits were the first, also in Argentina and Paraguay. The work of the missions was religious, not agricultural, and consequently we have information on agriculture. We knew what they planted, but not the niceties we like today of varietal names and so forth. If the missionaries were originally interested in this information, all is lost to history. What are left are the vestiges of the vineyards and orchards in Baja California, which would be very interesting germplasm repositories because they've been there since 1697. If you want to do some interesting reading, especially for history buffs, the reports written by men like Johann Jacob Begard and Joseph Ock, written after their expulsion from New Spain in 1767, give hair-raising information about life in the New World and their isolated missions. Both works are available in English translation and are eminently worth reading. For Spanish readers, there's a wonderful tome on the history of the vine and wine in Baja California, written by an Italian enologist, Bilo Magoni, working in Baja California some 30 years, who also sells his wine through an importer broker here in Napa, Tom Bracamontes, at a company called La Competencia, which means the competition. So, as to the history of wine in California, depends on which California one refers to. Baja California is far older by at least 85 years than what we know as Alta California, or the California colonized after 1769. California was known about, but considered unimportant compared with other areas in the Spanish Empire. It was to prevent colonization by other nations, Russia in particular. Sound familiar these days? In the first place, that created the ambience for the creation of what we know as California. And the mission variety goes along with this, hand in glove, as a grandmother. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl. And I guess we can start by, do you think we should start the white or do you want to start with the sparkling? Start with the sparkling. So your first slightly blush rosé glass, the País from our friends in Chile. Miguel Torres, a very important Catalan producer, fourth and fifth generation in Penedès. Of course, Penedès is where they make mostly cava, which is the official term allowed for méthode, what used to be called méthode champenoise, or classic method. So this is made in the champagne method. That means the second fermentation is in the bottle, as opposed to most sort of easy drinking sparkling would be done under different methods. Tank method, for example, like Prosecco, which is very popular at the moment. And when Miguel Torres, when he moved to Chile first in 1979, he first went there and planted really Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet, Merlot, tried to understand and identify the mystery of Chile at the time, which was Merlot, which had a very unique original flavor, and we did then realize that interplanted maybe 40% of what they called Merlot was a great variety called Carmenère, which was a lost variety from Bordeaux, which had been brought before phylloxera destroyed 80% of the vineyards in Europe. And now he's gone on to this new project, as Gerald mentioned, to really save these existing old vines, and it's a real social responsibility as well. This is what we call fair trade and organically certified, saving the campesitos, the small growers. And as you know, the most important thing, as we saw in the evolution in Napa Valley, is the relationship between the grower and the winemaker, providing the quality, supporting, giving a fair price for your grapes, so that people stay on the land. And in Chile, it's a big issue because, like in southern Italy, a lot of people are abandoning the land and coming into the cities, and that creates sort of social problems there. So really helping these campesitos get good value for their grapes. And as we'll discover, there are many different styles of mission, from fortified to dry wine to sparkling. And he's been very successful doing this sparkling País, which in this case is a rosé. He does make also a white version of the País. Daryl, would you like to make any comments?
I tasted this wine having been at a national tasting in Santiago, and it was very interesting because in California we've never known what to do with mission. We've always made dessert wine out of it because it lacks color. The clusters up here are from Henry's vineyard. They're mission, two different clones, but they don't look like mission that I've seen, because I've only seen mission from either Southern California in Cucamonga or mission from Amador County. And the clusters are large, but they're not that large. They're actually bigger. And in Chile, the clusters are much bigger, and the color is like the color we see in mission in Amador County, which is almost a bicolored cluster. So there's pink, white, and red grapes, and the color of the juice is always pale. So obviously, if you pick the wine early and you retain some acidity, you can in fact make perfectly interesting sparkling wine. That's what Miguel Torres has done. What's interesting is that the area that this comes from was considered the deep poverty area of the country of Chile, only because no one knew what to do with the grape variety. So now this is becoming very interesting, because since Torres took it over, all of the other producers are beginning to actually deal with trying to make price. So the price of grapes has gone up. The original growers are quite pleased with all of this. The other wine that's here, the next wine, the White Mission, I tasted this at the Fancy Food Show in San Francisco in January, at the big booth that was the country of Mexico. And we sold in the early 70s, we sold 1958 Barbera from Santo Tomas. And this was a wine I'd never seen before. it never occurred to me that you should be able to press it white. Here you have it, a white pressed chip. They say mission on the label. It may be all mission. Remember, if you read the label, it says Blanca, Mexico, 2015. But it does taste like mission. What's interesting is that they made a very interesting wine out of it. You know, as I said before, if it's mission wine or no wine, mission wine is going to be delicious. And, you know, then there's the problem. Then there's the problem of countries like Baja California. What do they want to do when they plant grapes? They want to plant fancy grapes. Chardonnay, Riesling, Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Syrah. Sometimes you can't plant those grapes and make good wine out of them. I think we've actually missed a little bit of a boat, and it's going to be shown with the last two wines, two Spanish varietals, that California probably needs more southern Mediterranean grape varieties than it does grape varieties from Northern Europe. Remember, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, Napa Valley. When I first came to Napa Valley in 1960, the most expensive wine in the Napa Valley winery was its Riesling, because Riesling was considered the most expensive wine grown. Whether it was made out of Riesling or not, it tasted like Riesling. That means high acidity, because most of the time it wasn't made out of Riesling. But Riesling-type wines were considered the most expensive. I mean, even at Beaulieu, the wine called Beauclair, which was Beaulieu's Johannesburg Riesling, it sold for more money than Beaulieu Cabernet. How much did Beaulieu Private Reserve sell for in 1955? $1.90 a bottle. Had to sell for $1.90 a bottle. That was one of the most expensive wines in California. Okay, Henry, you're on.
Actually, I forgot to mention when I introduced Daryl that, yes, in the 1940s, his family was the first to be buying a lot of wines from Napa Valley, from the Medavis, in bulk, to bottle at Corti Brothers, or bottle here, but in gallons and half gallons. And then in what, was it 1965 when there was this agreement where the fair price trade agreement where you had to negotiate directly with the winery and
the agreements between the retailer and the winery.
yeah, the fair trade agreement.
So we signed a lot of
He likes to bring up all of these things, I don't know why. But we signed, beginning in 1965, we signed a lot of the original fair trade contracts, which meant that a producer could sell to a retailer, because you had to have a contract with a retailer in order to sell the wine at one price. There was nothing like today where everything is open. That has happened, has changed in the late 70s under the first regime of Jerry Brown, where fair trade was dropped. So you could sell the wine at any price you wanted, provided it was 6% over the wine's cost. The previous history was that you had to sell the wine at what the wineries said you sold the wine for. So we signed the first trade contracts with lots of wineries in those days. Schramsberg, Ridge, Camus, Swan, Cuvée-Zon, Chateau Montelena, a lot of them. I don't even remember most of them. But we were their first customers. whatever that's worth.
Thank you, Darryl. I'd like to introduce next George Hendry and his nephew Mike. I met George maybe 25, 30 years ago. He was one of the growers for Robert Mondavi and selling his Cabernet to Opus One as well. And since then, he's also has a very close friendship with Geneviève Jensen, the winemaker for her own wine project. And he was part of the Carneros Quality Alliance group, and I actually went to Burgundy with him, with a group of growers to research, clone selection, compost, organic farming, and that sort of thing. And in fact, Oscar Renteria was also on that trip back in the late 90s or so. And when George was born in Oakland in 1937, we were laughing about how Gertrude Stein was also in Oakland at the time and had a different reputation. He moved to Napa in 1939, so when he was 2 years old, at the family ranch that was purchased by his father. He'll tell us about his father, who was a university professor at UC Berkeley and UC Davis in agriculture, did very interesting research. And this is a house that was built, I think, in 1882, and he's done a lot of renovation. There was no plumbing and electricity when he moved there, and he has lived in that same house since 1939. So I invite you all to go down to the Hendry Estate and see this beautiful historic home. His actual training is in engineering and mathematics, and both physics and chemistry from UC Berkeley. He has a master's in electromagnetic field theory, and in 1993 he was building cyclotrons, which are very useful for radioactive isotopes. And he also did some organic chemistry, which then helped him really understand the effects of polyphenols and the polymerization of tannins in wine. But he does have a day job, which is building cyclotrons, as well as running this family farm and converting and developing the prunes and walnuts to grapes. So he'll be giving us a quick background on his family history, and we'll be tasting the Albarino, which has just been poured, and we'll also be tasting the Mission grape from his nephew Mike. And Mike was born in Davis, California, and moved to Canada with his family. His father was also in the academic world, and he had lived in Edmonton and Alberta, and got a master's degree in mechanical engineering then at UC Davis, and a physics degree from Victoria in BC. Since 2001, he's been managing the vineyards at Hendry Ranch, and he is the first really Hendry to make a full-time career in the wine business. And George will tell you how it's important to have sometimes a second career when you're in the wine business. So welcome George and Mike Hendry. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilles. As Gilles mentioned, Mom and Dad came to Napa in 1939. Dad was a professor. He had appointments at both Davis and Berkeley. He was very much a Renaissance man. He had many, many interests, and one of them was determining which plant species were grasses, in particular growing here in California before European settlers came. His method was to find old adobes and separate out the grasses that were used as binders, look at the seeds, and if they were there, that was an original California species. That led him to a lot of very interesting historical work. He actually mapped all of the Bay Area land grants, who owned them, mapped their extent, took notes on them, and all of that information is now archived in the Bancroft Library in Berkeley. He also, in his research, ended up going into Baja California, and on one of the trips, he uncovered the marker that basically was used to separate the Franciscan lands and the Dominican lands, which was Alta and Baja, California. Mike will give you more on that, because Mike has also been down there and been visiting the same marker. So my mother had been a school teacher in Berkeley. She gave up her day job and actually turned into the farmer on the ranch. Back at that time, we had dairy cattle and plum trees. Those were dairy cattle and plum trees at that time, folks, had considerably more market value than grapes did. In fact, this is all well documented in Charles Sullivan's Napa wine book. So we grew up basically with a prune orchard on the ranch. We had dairy cattle, there were some grapevines, very nice neighbors. You know, in short, guys, this was a great place to grow up. We got to the 1960s. About that time, things started to change. More and more people in this country were drinking dry table wine. And what we saw was the demand for our wine grapes was going up. Dairy cattle and plum trees were pretty much headed in the other direction. During that decade, the 1960s, it became clearer and clearer that if you wanted to pay your bills here, you better be growing grapes. Trying to turn a family farm or a general farm into a vineyard is tough. The time lapse between planting the vine and the first reliable paycheck, pretty substantial. Many of the farms that we grew up with never made that transition. That transition, guys, turned out to be my job, because in the 1960s, it was now my turn to be the farmer. Well, like my dad, I kept my day job. What that did was keep the dairy cattle and plum trees on the ranch for 2 or 3 more years. We got to 1970, guys. It was about time to get out of the Nile on that issue. You grow grapes here, or you get out of here. We were able to do it. The day job helped bridge that 7 years of negative cash flow. The little vineyard. Mom and Dad did have a little vineyard here. We had some Nvwl grapes, we had Petit Syrah, or Tarif, and we had a Rhone grape called Carignan. Those grapes were in demand now. The vineyard was doing a good job. That was a really big help. And of course, the day job helped bridge the 7 years of negative cash flow. Mom and Dad had 6 acres planted the vines on the ranch. We increased that now to planted acreage of 114. They had 3 different grapes. We now grow 12. I'm second generation. My brother's son Michael, here is 3rd generation. And we have a little 4th generation. Now, over the years, when you farm a piece of land, you begin to learn quite a bit about it. One of the, in 1992, I was replacing an old Chardonnay vineyard, and not 1992, 2002. And actually, I wanted to plant a grape that would work well in that part of the vineyard. It's a fairly low part of the vineyard, quite a bit of moisture in the soil. I was afraid that would make a very indistinguished, a very mediocre red wine. So I was looking for another alternative. I actually, in 1992, at the wine library tasting, I ran into my old friend Mike Hayes, who was pouring an Albarino. I like the Albarino. It's a dry, crisp white wine, and I basically decided, okay, we're going to take that little wet corner of the vineyard, and we'll try an Albarino vineyard there. That turned out to be successful, and I wouldn't advertise it as a good bill payer, but when you've got your own winery and you're basically trying to make a really nice light white, it is very popular. You don't have to spend a lot of money marketing it, so it actually does put groceries on the table. So that's one of many examples of things you learn over many years growing grapes in the same vineyard. Knowing your land, guys, is very, very important. So let me turn this over to Mike now, and he can bring you up to date on some of the more interesting things.
Just want to make sure that everybody has the Albarino tasted in a recent bottle. Maybe later come and see the label, because all the Henry labels are very interesting. And there are only a handful of Albarinos, and I think our next producer also produced an Albarino. You had also tasted Albarino, George, the first time, I believe, in Madrid, way back when you were there on business. And
I was in Spain in 1962, actually, and I ran into it there the first time. And
you tell them where it's
interesting.
from. Tell them where it's from. I mean,
Well, actually, Albarino grows in the northwest corner of Spain. It grows at the mouth of the Minho River, which actually separates northwestern Spain from Portugal. It also grows on the Portuguese side of the border. It's a little region called Rias Baixas, and that part of Spain is cool, wet, and green. And so that was one of the reasons that I thought my wetter part of the vineyard might actually work well with that grape.
So I'll say just a very brief thing about this boundary marker in between Baja and Alta California. I think there are a number of them spread around the tables here, but I grew up with sort of looking at these piles of old California history in George's house, and it was more than a hobby of my grandfather's. He spent a lot of time on it. And there were these old letters that talked about this expedition that he went on down to Baja. And at the time, there was, whether it was water or fuel or anything, it was quite an expedition. He sort of prepared for it for a long time. And then he, by translating these old diaries, he was able to go find this, what was the original marker between Baja and Alta California, which at the time was sort of I think more of a bureaucratic boundary than anything else, but eventually sort of had implications for where the boundary between California and Mexico wound up. So he makes a point in here of saying that the original boundary between Baja and Alta California was actually 12 miles south of the existing boundary. And I knew all this had happened, but I didn't really think much of it until one day I read this article, and at the end, he mentions, and in terms of the script, it was, his handwriting was pretty impressive, and he wrote out this note and put it in a Chianti wine bottle and buried it in this marker down there. And I reading through this, of course, I had this thought, like, I wonder if anybody's been back there, and I wonder if that's still there. So basically reading the descriptions he wrote and, looking at Google Earth, I was basically able to find where those I started to find the little valleys and draws that he talked about. And after a couple hours on Google Earth, I thought I found it. And then, my brother and I, we got on an airplane at 6 in the morning and flew to San Diego and rented a car and jumped over a couple of fences and climbed up in the hills and were there by 11 in the morning. So, but there was also no Chianti wine bottle. So that was the bad news. But it was very fun to sort of retrace that, and we have a lot of really, I don't know if any of you have been to our winery, we have some of the old California history stuff in there. And when it comes to the mission grape here, we've heard a lot of big picture stuff, and my interest in mission didn't start with the big picture. I kind of wanted to know what it tasted like. And there were a few things about Mission that bothered me. One was that, I mean, obviously it had a very long history. And you could find, as far as I can tell, really the vast majority of that history, whether it's in South America or here, it's really wine that's made in a dry red style. And you can find all these people that tell you that it was terrible. I mean, all the books would say it's terrible, and we know better than to make it anymore. But all these people who told me it was terrible, apparently had never tried it, which bothered me. And it also seemed strange that there's a 300+ year history of growing it, and it seemed odd that people stuck with it for 300 years because it was always terrible. And so my first experience with Mission was a bottle of wine from the Guadalupe Valley, like the one you've got there, and I tasted it, and it was definitely not terrible. But here, if you want to talk to someone about Cabernet Sauvignon, you've got lots of options. But if you want to talk about Mission, there don't seem to be many. And I did eventually find someone, but he would never call me back. So I started at UC Davis, and I got my hands on 4 of the clones of Mission that they have available, and I grafted 20 plants each, which was a bit of a struggle because I had to convince George to graft over some Cabernet Franc that was otherwise quite productive and profitable to try Mission, which no one had anything nice to say about. But I've spent 5 or 6 years trying to understand how it grows and what the limitations are and how to grow it properly. And it is true that you can take almost any grape and make terrible wine from it, but until you take a grape and you put it in the right place and you spend the time and the energy to do it properly, you don't really know what the potential is. And it's, I've still got a lot to learn with that. If you want to see what Mission clusters really look like, go down the stairs, and on the left-hand side on the wall is a very old picture, Napa picture, of a bunch of people picking grapes, and the big clusters on those vines are Mission clusters. These are clusters that have been sort of clipped and trimmed substantially. And there were 2 different clones. I think it's sort of spread out a little bit now. So they're
13 and clone.
Yes, I think clone 2 and clone 13 were those 2. And I've decided that I'd like to get a little more of the clone 13. I've grafted more of that out of the 4 that I have. It's what I like the most. But I make a single barrel of this every year. There's nothing particularly complicated about the winemaking. I mean, I'm still in the process of understanding what it does. So I basically ferment it dry, press it at dryness, and then it gets about a year in essentially a neutral French oak barrel. This also, I mean, with a single barrel, we make 24 cases of this, and I think this will be maybe the only retail opportunity for this wine. So if you'd like some, I'd like to limit it to 3 bottles per person, but you can buy some if you like.
But just to confirm something is that hopefully everybody got to taste the berry, so that this is not ripe yet. The grape just went through veraison, or turning its true color. I was actually in the vineyard with Mike a few days ago, and we were doing some cross-fitting together. And as Daryl mentioned, why is this grape popular for 300 years? Because it gave you a really big crop. Because it was a tough and resistant to drought. The skins are quite hard. There's actually, if you look at the cluster, what we call cluster morphology, they're not as tight as compact as a Pinot Noir, for example. So looser clusters, more airflow. Therefore, you don't have as much pressure on mildew or funguses. Obviously, when you're out there in the Mission in the early days, you don't have, the advance of sulfur treatment or copper sulfate came not until the 19th century. So you needed a grape that was tough, that could, handle the drought situation, and that was easier to handle and could be beaten around, of course, especially when you were doing foot treading on skins, or getting the local Indians to do that originally. So I think, You know, we've had the opportunity this morning to taste a white mission, which is totally incredible, from Baja, and never tasted one before, a sparkling from Chile, and then this new wave of, as Daryl said, Pais is actually getting very popular in Chile, and not in Chile, meaning the international world. Sort of hip sommeliers are really interesting part of natural wine movement, unusual varieties, and so California hasn't even started yet on that front, and there are very few still wine missions made. How many have you come across, Gerald?
This one.
This is the only. So this is a very unique experience to be in this. This is the only one, and this wine is only sold. They don't even sell it at the Henry winery. He gives the 20, how many? 20 cases, 25 cases you make, right? To one little broker that sells it to a few hip restaurants around California. That's the only way you can taste this wine. So if you go to a restaurant, you see it, now you can order it. But if you want some today, Henry very generously will offer a few bottles. In your handout, there is a form. Also in your handout, in that historical thing, you may have seen the picture of Mike Henry's grandfather and George Henry's father. He's holding a rattlesnake at the marker of the when he buried a bottle of Chianti. I like the idea that we're talking about mission, and we have him burying a bottle of Chianti, which he probably had a wicker basket and protected it probably.
Well, in the letter that he wrote to his mom after this trip, that picture captures the moment when the rattlesnake came alive in his hand at the end. So he apparently thought he killed it, but he hadn't. So, but I wanted to say one other thing about this of the 12 grapes that we grow. Mission is the one that goes through veraison the latest. It's actually a very late grape, and it's, you know, presumably when you know, everybody sort of famously quotes that they couldn't get grapes ripe at Mission in San Francisco, which I know is true, but if you didn't want to get grapes ripe there, that's not the right grape to start with. It is quite a late grape.
Mike has said that the two clones that they have is clone 2 and clone 13 from FPS. Mission 02 is source of California vineyard, treatments none. This selection came to Davis from a California vineyard in Woodbridge, California, around 1959.
Louder, please.
This clone was
This clone is from 1959 in Woodbridge, so it's from Lodi. Clone 13 is from Jackson, California. No treatment. This selection came from the vineyard at the former University of California Experiment Station in Jackson, California in 1966. There are two other vineyards in Amador County that have Mission that are currently being sold. We're going to taste both of them today. One vineyard dates from 1890, and the other vineyard dates from 1865. So the vineyards are obviously the vine is very rustic, meaning that it's going to last for a very long time. The other less rustic varieties are varieties that we think make more interesting wine today, but they're much more delicate. And if you consider that the wine that you're tasting as Albarino, we don't know where it comes from. But we know only one thing, that the Cistercian monks who were in Kloster Eberbach, which is now Steinberg in the Rheingau in Germany, actually went to Compostela. It was Santiago de Compostela. It was a very famous pilgrimage route. They brought the vine from Germany to Galicia, which at that time was the end of the world. It's called Finis Terrae. So Albarino is a great variety that we don't know where it comes from. We don't know its antecedents, but we know that it did come from Germany. It's not grown in Germany any longer. As opposed to Verdejo, which we know who the parents are. We don't know who the parents are of Albarino.
Thank you, Daryl. I love that he didn't even know which clones we were tasting, but he can pull out a document and give us the information of the origin of the clone in the selection. I think when he said they weren't cleaned up, I think that was the terminology, I hope everybody understands what that means. Sometimes when you select a budwood from a mother vine, because you don't want to spread viruses and things, you have heat treatment. So some vines, which are certified clones, are heat treated, which some people think has an effect on the leather. And this is, I think, a good introduction to our next panelist, which is the Martinez family. Yes, a quick question?
I don't understand how traditional was
That's one.
Okay, so obviously, quick question. No questions were allowed. Remember that? No, just kidding. From a red grape, of course, we never judge anything by its color, as we know in America today. So, from a red grape, you can make a white wine, you can make a rosé, or you can make a red wine. I have most champagnes in France, blanc de noir, white from black. You just gently press. That's why the handling, the picking bins, everything. Or sometimes you move the presses in the vineyard and press and get the juice out. If there's a little skin contact, it becomes rosé or œil de perdrix or partridge eye. And of course, you can make a red wine with skin contact maceration, like all full-bodied reds. Maceration and skin contact is how you extract flavor.
So I don't know the answer to this, but I am confused by it. I also do the farming in an old vineyard that was planted in 1905, and Andy Walker from Davis, who is one of the experts on vine identification, came out to help me with a few vines. And there are two in there that he called White Mission, and they're white grapes. So what I don't know is whether or not, in the same sense as Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir, if it's a color mutation of the same plant, or if it's actually a different grape. And I kind of suspect it's a color mutation.
Yeah, very good point. A lot of mutations, as he said. Yeah. Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, kind of halfway there. Pinot Blanc, Pinot Beurre, so white mutations of the same.
And as Nicole said, Grenache Blanc. So that happens in a bunch of varieties. So I think you can, and as Gilles said, you can make a white wine from red grapes, but I'm not sure that's the case here.
So it's just two plants randomly and how long?
2 plants in 10 acres.
Yeah. That's why obviously it's vine selection, identification, clonal identification versus field selection, what we call sélection massale, is important. And our next panelists are here for that one very important reason. We're not going to talk about, as Darryl was saying, the key to making great wine is you've got to select the right grapes, put in the right soil and the right environment. Then you have to have the labor and the attention to detail and the passion, and sometimes sans folie, l'homme est plus petit. Sometimes you have to be really dedicated. And I want to introduce Corinne Martinez in the middle of the panel. Raise your hand, Corinne. The Martinez family, who, without me knowing, when I invited her, they have been providing bench graft and rootstocks to the Henry vineyards for many years. And when I was last at the Henry Ranch, they were grafting. In the morning, we went out in the vineyard, it was 6, 7 o'clock, and saw them grafting some Cabernet Sauvignon on St. George, I believe, at the time, that came from the Martinez nursery in Winters, California, in what's known as the northern part of Yolo County, the Berryessa Gap. It's a beautiful drive from St. Helena. Just go by Lake Berryessa and drop into the east side of the coastal range. And Winters is really going through a wonderful renaissance. I mean, the town is beautiful. It wasn't spoiled in the 70s. It has a lot of charm, great restaurants. And the Martinis at Berryessa Gap have a tasting room in the town of Winters. They also have a tasting room at the winery, which is not very far, and I was lucky to go there. They also have a microbrewery close by, which I think is a business of one of her brothers, and with food trucks and everything. So if you're going that way, please stop by Berryessa Gap. And the Martinez family are from Spain, hence we have in their honor the Spanish flag. Since the theme of today was New Spain, I thought we would then talk about really finding Spanish people that actually planted Spanish grape varieties in California, and of course then the influence of Mexico and the history of the mission, which is all the themes we're touching on today. So I want to let Corinne maybe tell the story about her family and their evolution from nurserymen to now winemakers, and then she'll introduce maybe Nicole, the winemaker, who will talk about the Verdejo. Corinne Martinez.
Thank you, Jules. Good to be here. So just a little bit about my family and our history, as you said. So my grandparents, I'm the second generation, my grandparents came from Spain in the late 20s, early 30s. There were quite a number of Spanish families that settled in Winters, which is just about 30 miles over the hill here on 128. And so my dad, his brothers and sister were all born in Spain, but my dad was the youngest. He was actually born here in 1936 in the hills there between Winters and Vacaville. And he started, my grandfather was working on farms, initially up in the Cape Valley, and then eventually bought a small piece of property right in Winters, just south of Peter Creek, and had a few fruit trees. So my dad started farming himself out of high school, and actually bought his first orchard really near where our winery is today, and planted some apricots. And that was in the early 60s. And then so he was an orchard farmer, initially apricots, then some almonds. He eventually switched over to prunes and walnuts. But in 1969, there was a fruit inspector who lived in San Francisco by the name of Ernie Pennenew, who's a great wine historian and has written books about the history of wine in Sonoma County. And Ernie was looking for a farming partner to start a nursery business. As this area was growing, and as George said, we needed to plant grapes here. So, and we're really close to UC Davis there, and we're really close to the Wolfsville station, where they have just about every grape variety you can have there. So Ernie was in Winters looking for a farmer to partner with, and my dad was, delivering fruit to the California Fruit Exchange, and so they met and started a grapevine nursery business in 1969 called Yolo Hills Viticultural Society, which is now today Martinez Orchards. After Ernie retired, my dad bought him out, and my brother Dan runs that today and continues to sell grapevines to about 90% of the business is sold here in the valley, but he sells a few other places as well. So my dad farmed, well, as I said, apricots and almonds, and eventually prunes and walnuts, along with the grapevine nursery business for years. And when my brother came back to start farming with him after he got out of school, he eventually bought a piece of property and planted a vineyard, as he likes to say. We bought a big plot of land, planted some prunes, planted some walnuts, had some rolling hills. Said, what can we grow there? Well, we have a bunch of grapevines here, so let's plant some grapes and see if we can grow some grapes here in Winters. Winters actually has a pretty long history of wine as well, but it kind of went away. So in 2000, Dan and Santiago, his farming partner, planted some grapes, and having been in the rootstock business, they were able to test out a lot of different grape varieties, because you have to have the budwood as well. So although they had a bunch of grapes, they didn't really farm them for grapes per se, but a few other people bought some grapes from them, made some wine. But we got a real sense of what kind of grapes varieties would do well in our area, in Winters, in our climate. And so in picking the varieties that we were going to plant there, Dan was going to plant there, he had a lot of good information about what would do well there. And, based on given that we're Spanish, we wanted to plant a few Spanish varieties as well. So we have, in addition to the Verdejo that you'll taste today, we also make an Albarino, and we have Tempranillo. So kind of that whole, if you go on the Camino de Santiago, you get to go through all those wine regions and end up in Finisterre, Galicia, in Santiago de Compostela. But anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of the history of our family and how we got into the wine business. Nicole here turns the grapes, and my brother grows into some magic. So I'll let her talk a little bit about the wine.
what we don't remember is history in California. Does anyone here know the name of Arpad Haratzi? Arpad Haratzi.
Haratzi from Sonoma.
Arpad Haratzi was Agustin Haratzi's son. He creates a winery, and it's a company called the Orleans Hills Viticultural Society. Where is the Orleans Hills, or where are the Orleans Hills? By Winters. It was the first sparkling wine company in Northern California, because there's already sparkling wine being made in Los Angeles. They made a wine called Eclipse, which was the most famous sparkling wine made in California in those days. It comes from where the Martinez's have their farm.
They also plan, will you tell them a little bit of what else you plan? Because I had a very interesting tasting of Durif and Petit Syrah there. And
Sure, yeah. In addition to the Spanish varieties, we do have Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, and Durif. We also have a little Malbec, and based on Nicole's influence recently, we've grafted in a little Barbera on the red side. So those are the red varieties that we have. And then in addition to the Albarino and Verdejo for whites, we have some Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. But the Durif and the Petit Syrah, we do both. Our Petit Syrah was actually planted because of our connection to Ernie and the history here in the valley. When we planted the vineyard, it was planted as a mixed vineyard. So it's got some Zinfandel in it, some Pelerisson, initially some Syrah in there. So we make a Petit Syrah, which is a field blend essentially. We pick it together, co-ferment it, and call that our Petit Syrah. It's 78% Petit Syrah in the vineyard. And then we have a block of 100% Durif, which we also bottle as a unique variety.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Solenko. I'm winemaker at Various Gap. Excited to be here today, and really excited about these interesting wines we're trying. And I will admit, I am not Spanish and I am not from California. But the reason I am here is I am that attention to detail portion of the winery, and I am really interested in discovering what varieties grow best in our region, Western Yolo County, as Gilles said, in the foothills of the Coastal Range. I find that it's a very unique growing region. It's Napa and everything else, but I do feel that we're still learning and discovering what does grow best there. So I am fortunate enough to work with the Martinez family that have all the resources and the land and the expertise and patience, oh my goodness, to go about the experimentation of planting all these interesting varieties and allowing me to work with them in the winery. I'm here to talk about my experience with Verdejo. I have worked with it and made it for the last 6 years. We currently have 1.5 rows of it. It comes in anywhere from half a ton to 3/4 of a ton every year. So there's not a lot of room for error. In 2017, my 5th vintage making it at Various Gap. That's what you're tasting today. I kind of switched it up more than ever, and learning a lot about this grape. I will admit, every year I've changed how I've made it because I don't know what the best flavors and how to best produce this wine. So it's a work in progress for sure. Fred was talking about the different varieties we made. We have what I consider the aromatic whites, which are the Sauvignon Blanc, the Albarino, we have some Sauvignon Muscat, and then we have what I like to think the more serious whites, which are the Chardonnay and the Verdejo that's here today. We used to make Verdelho, and I am excited to say it was really fun working with that grape, but we this year grafted over all of our Verdelho, or Verdelho as they would say in Portugal, to Verdejo. So starting in another couple of years, we'll have a lot more coming online. So this is my time to figure it out. So this particular Verdejo, the 2017, it was the first year we mechanically harvested it. And, you know, I learned a lot about that. I'm all about high quality wine production, but doing it in an efficient manner. And this is our precious 1.5 rows were, you know, in my mind, going to get torn up in this mechanical harvester. What was I going to do? But I'll admit, it came in, we started picking 4 in the morning. I had the fruit by 5 a.m. We had it in the press, and it was finished pressing by noon. It's a nice slow press that we like to do, very gentle. But I will tell you that I like a little skin contact on what we call the Joe in the winery. We abbreviate stuff because there's a lot of varieties. And so typical white wine making, after you press it, you want to do a cold settling to get any of the solids out. I don't believe in any fining or anything at the juice stage. You want to kind of savor everything that you have, and then if you need to fine tune it later on, that's fine. So I, every year, have used a different yeast on the Verdejo. I've experimented with the red wine yeast. I've experimented with a Sauvignon Blanc yeast, and this particular one, I actually did use Rhone 4600, which is a little trick that I learned long ago from a Napa Valley winemaker, one of my mentors. He used to use that in Chardonnay. So I just, still trying to figure this variety out, and I figured out I like skin contact. I think we're heading forward in the direction of a little more of a robust yeast. We always try to pick this. So growing, I want to speak a little bit about growing in Nvwl County. It's pretty hot there. However, we have nice cool evenings, lots of breezes. The influence of Berryessa Gap, which is actually a landmark to the west of us, created by Lake Berryessa, which is 11 miles west of us. Every evening we get this really strong breeze in our vineyard that's up in these hills. So you can have these 100 degrees plus days, but every night you're going to get this nice cool breeze. And I had the opportunity, thank you, Corinne, I took a sabbatical in 2015 because I was working with all these Iberian varieties and I didn't know too much about them. And I said, I think I have to go to the source and I want to learn about Albarino. I want to go to Galicia. I want to learn about Verdejo. I want to go to Rueda. And I went to the owners and it was a shot in the dark, but they gave me 2 months off and a paid sabbatical in Spain. And I really did have the opportunity to visit a lot of wineries, talk with a lot of grape growers, and went to all these regions that are producing the same varieties that we're producing. And what I learned specifically about Verdejo is it's super versatile. Very similar to Chardonnay. You can make it in many different styles. We had this experience kind of purchasing different Verdejos made from different producers from different countries. You could pick it early and have this really acidic, very bright, super food friendly white, or you can also go to the other end of the spectrum and kind of have a heavier, higher alcohol, less acidic. I'm trying to do something in the middle because I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. So I will tell you, our Verdejo this year, Gilles came over and did a little sampling of the 1 barrel that we have. It's just about done fermenting, and I think it's the best one yet. And there's a lot of reasons to that, but we're really realizing that white varieties grow well in our vineyard, and specifically, these are Iberian whites. So I hope you like the taste, and thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Nicole. Can you tell us also a little bit of your experience with aging in acacia barrels? Because that's very unique, and you don't see that a lot in
Yes. Yep. Love just trying new things, and as a winemaker, you have aging options for white wines: stainless steel, oak barrel. White wines, you're trying to control the phenolics. You don't want really dry finish. At least I don't in a wine. And when I was aging the Verdejo in stainless steel, I wasn't getting enough in the finish. And then we went and I tried aging it in a neutral oak barrel, and it still wasn't enough. Added a little buck, but it just wasn't quite there. So then I got a new white barrel, and then the finish was way too phenolic, way too tannic, and too many dry tannins in the finish. So last year, the one that is here today, we experimented with an acacia barrel. And what I liked about it was, you got the body that you would get from an oak vessel, but you get a cleaner finish, and you're not getting those oak tannins. So this year again, we not only will age in the acacia barrel, we experimented fermenting it. So.
Well, thank you. I think what's important to highlight is that the diversity and how California, all its different regions, we're here in Napa Valley, it's very important not to be sort of provincial in our vision. We need to see what all the other counties are doing within California, and there's a lot of experimenting. And as Darren was saying, back in the 70s here, or even earlier, what was the most planted grape in Napa? It was probably Gamay, and it was Riesling, and it was Zinfandel. So to have this exciting experiments of Verdejo, Albarino, how do we adapt the winemaking to make it our unique style, I think is important. So to try this Verdejo, only 25 cases made one row of vine. And I like that they're very honest about mechanical harvesting, because we're going to be talking about the influence of labor on California history. And the picking machines are very good now. Depending on the variety, and of course on your trellising and your viticulture first, you can pick at night, which of course you can pick at night by hand. Only California is the only country in the world doing that, actually. But you can't look down on picking machine. When I was at Mendavi, we did trials, blind tasting, Cabernet picked by machine or by man, and there was no difference whatsoever. So not that I'm trying to sell French picking machines, because most of them are made in France, and that's really good, but that's good. And Albarino, if you think of the name, Alba, white, Rino, from the Rhine, which, of course, he's gonna love. So I wanted Daryl to jump in for a minute. Go ahead, Daryl.
Grape varieties take their names normally not from where they come, but what the variety looks like. So when people look at a grape variety, when farmers look at a grape variety, you're a farmer. If you see a tip of a growing shoot, and you see the color looks like the morning sun, what are you going to call that grape variety? If you speak Spanish, the morning sun is called the alba. So the name of grape varieties actually comes from what they look like. There's a very famous one here. It's a type of Pinot Noir. It's called Pinot Meunier. Why is it called Pinot Meunier? Why don't they just call it Pinot Noir? Because when you look at it, it looks like it's been dusted with flour. What's the French word for a flour miller? Meunier. That's how they get their names, not by where they come from. Okay? However, since this is the Napa Valley Wine Library, and wine librarians have to remember lots of things about wine, who was the first winery in Napa Valley that had acacia casks? Nobody. Joseph Phelps. Because they were brought in when Joseph Phelps Winery started. Not immediately as it started, but Walter Schul, who was the winemaker then, actually brought in acacia casks, and they're casks like these. They're punches. He brought them in because that's what they used to make their German varieties. So acacia is something in the United States, and in Napa Valley in particular. Sometimes we never learn or forget anything. So, we started out with new oak, and we continue with new oak. No one ever said that any kind of wine had to be made in new oak, because who makes money then? The coopers, not the winemaker. In Bordeaux, before the Second World War, all of the wood that was used came from the north of Europe, from Latvia, from Russia. They didn't use French wood. But why do we have French oak barrels? And where do they come from? They come from the center part of France. And the forests were created by the French government, by the king's minister, by Louis XIV's minister of finance, Colbert, who created the forest in the middle of France that we know as Limousin and Nevers, so in Limoges and in the Nièvre, for what? To supply masts for the French Navy, not to make barrels. So you have to get that stuff out of your mind. Because now, we're going to have to start looking at, well, whose cement tank do we use? And in California, they got rid of all the cement tanks when put in stainless steel.
Good news is France has nuclear submarines, and maybe they should go back to wooden ships. Thank you, Daryl. So next, on the evolution of our journey, of the influence of New Spain and Mexico into California, history of viticulture, I want to introduce to my right Oscar Renteria. I also met Oscar and took him to Burgundy on an exploration trip over 20 years ago as part of the Carneros Quality Alliance group. He was the youngest man there. He had the most ambition, visions, questions. He's a man always questioning, always asking, always wanting to innovate. He's third generation, I would say, California Mexican. His grandfather came, I think, with the Bracero movement back in the 40s and brought his oldest uncle, who still is alive and lives here in Rutherford. And he'll tell the story about his dad, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and then how he somehow convinced his dad to get into another part of the wine business. And my little story about Oscar, I have plenty of them, but I'll keep them simple here today, is that when he got out of school, he didn't want to go, of course, into vines and vineyards. Who would? As a second generation. In fact, his father didn't want to. When he first worked in the vineyards, he left and went back to Mexico and started his barber shop. And he was then convinced again to come back. But Oscar, of course, graduated in business administration, and he applied for a job. And in the late 70s, 80s, what was the most exciting winery in the Napa Valley then? Of course, Robert Mondavi. And he applied for the job as head controller at Robert Mondavi. It was his first job out of college. And I remember the head controller at the time, or somebody in Mondavi calling your dad and saying, Salvador, do you know your son has just applied for that job as head controller of Robert Mondavi, his first job out of college? And they said, yeah, that's my son Oscar, he's ambitious. So Oscar Renteria, everybody, welcome.
That was 30 years ago that we went to Burgundy with Mr. Henry and with Gilles. So as Joe was saying, my father couldn't be here. My mother, unfortunately, has dementia, and mornings are hard for her. We are going to be presenting tonight at the Farmer Foundation on our auction at Stomp for the Napa Valley Grape Growers, and we always do the funding need. So I need my mother and my father in the crowd for 600 people to raise about $1 million tonight. So I need her to rest for a great cause. So my story starts with my father and my mother. My mother, with her family of 7 siblings and her mom and dad, came from Mexico and landed in Yountville in 1952 illegally when she was 13 years old. I say that because I have 3 daughters, 12, 15, and 17, and each of my daughters The last one was about to turn 13 in 2 weeks. Gets to hear the story about my mother's journey from Mexico. I think it's a really good perspective for them to see. Obviously, living in Napa is great. It's price of privilege, and I think as the generations gone on and got better for them, they don't remember what certainly their grandparents went through. So it's a great opportunity to tell that story. She worked in the vineyards. She worked in all agriculture. They migrated up and down California, picking cotton, asparagus, tomatoes, you name it, she did it. My father came from Jalisco, Guadalajara, and he came here in 1962. He landed from the bus in San Diego to where the Rutherford Road is. The Rutherford Road at the time was a little handy store owned by a Spaniard. It had a market, it had a little pool table. And in 1962, he met my mother, introduced by my uncle, who was here in 1958 as part of the Brasseurs program, who still lives in the same house in Rutherford today. Pretty incredible story. I have 14 aunts and uncles in the valley, 36 first cousins. Growing up in Napa, my first language was English, Spanish. I get it mixed up still. And so, being a center daughter of a migrant farm worker in Napa, you worked in the fields. And you worked in the fields generally at the age of 11, if you're a boy, your hands were strong enough. And for the females, it was usually age of 12 or 13. And it's pretty cold in those days when we would do tying, pulling brush. We couldn't prove because our hands weren't strong enough to actually close a pruning shear for these pretty heavy vines that used to grow back in the day. But I really didn't care. It didn't matter because all my uncles and all my aunts and I have only one younger sister. The rest of my family members have 4+ kids in their family. I have more family in Mexico as well. So you grew up doing it. And it didn't matter to me until I got to high school. And my parents, on purpose, I was born in St. Helena, lived in St. Helena until I was 7 years old, and my mother and my father decided to move us out of St. Helena to Napa so that we both go to a St. Apollinaris grade school to learn to speak English, because we did not speak any English. None of my cousins, none of my family spoke the language. And so we only family moved out of St. Helena. Interesting, those days when families would get together here, we had really big families. They came in drones. And in fact, my mother, Megan's name is Aguida. Her sisters, Aguida, married 3 of the same brothers from another family, the Gilguin family. Gilguin and Aguida, we just last week had our family dinner for the Aguida side of 140 people at the Nvwl Park. Thank you, Nvwl. So we have a lot of family. Mostly still talk to each other. My dad's side, I seem to be the communicator for all, and it was just an interesting time to grow up. In high school, at the age of 14, I ended up deciding to get a job and not work in the fields. I then had more Anglo friends, and I assimilated very well into the culture. At that, I graduated in 1985. In 1987, I decided to go. I was in college, and my father, who had been working for the largest vineyard management company in Napa, and still is today, Walsh Vineyard Management, that was founded in 1972. I'm going to rewind a little bit and go back to my father landing here on Plymouth Rock in 1962. So when he came here, he worked at Sterling Vineyards. He worked one harvest and was pretty hard on it. His trade back in Mexico was a barber and a bull shark, believe it or not. So he left here, went with a friend to Chicago in 1962, and stayed there for about 8 months. And it was cold, and he came back. But while he was in Chicago, he did very well as a bull shark. Still to this day, he's a hell of a golfer. That's his love now. His game is the little white ball. And so, as my father planted working for Sterling Vineyards, I was born in St. Helena. I lived and grew up at the Sterling not officially a labor camp, but that's where the laborers that were the supervisors and managers lived, and that's where I lived. I grew up my first few years. He was given the opportunity to plant the first vineyard for Sterling, one of their first vineyards, which was the three-palm vineyard, 1968. And at that time, in 1966, was when Niels Venke, and Niels Venke was the winemaker of Roth, actually the first winemaker to receive 100-point wine from Parker in 1982 at Roth. I tell you this story because his son is my winemaker now. It's really pretty great to have that history of legacy between my father and Niels back in the 60s, and now his son and I, who are very, very close, are now making wines together and growing a lot of grapes for a lot of his clients. But my father decided that in 1987, I was in college, so my sister decided that he could no longer farm vineyards because he's a very passionate man, but it got to his health. He had anxiety and he had a lot of different things, and his health was hurting. So he called me and told me he was not going to be able to, I'm not sure he's going to be able to afford to put me through college still. And my sister, who was going to Stanford, no problem, she had full ride. And I did not. I was not the smartest, but I was book smart. I was definitely world smart. And I ended up putting myself through college. And then in 1989, my father decided that he was going to start his own management company and asked me, and I had just graduated from college. And had a good job. Just started for 1 week, had all my suits, and my dad called me to say he'd like to start his own company if I would be willing to come home and help him. I didn't hesitate one bit. I came home to help my father start his company. He was very mad to come back. He did not tell me he wasn't going to pay me, but he did feed me, so I'll take that. And if anybody's had any experience working for their father or their mother, you'll know it's not very easy. It can be great, but it was very difficult. My father was a very passionate man, and he wanted to teach me a lot as quick as he could. At his retirement party in 1987, which was held at the Bricks restaurant, I didn't really know a lot of these guys, even though I worked in high school at Silver Oak for Justin Myers my last 2 years. So Justin was there, and Robert Mondavi was there, and Andre Chel. There was a lot of people that were then. I didn't know who they were. I just see pictures and still have these pictures of all these great giants in our industry. And the one thing he said about my father was that I remember talking about it. Said, your father was a master in viticulture. In 1982, when my father and Andre Chel planted BB1, BB2, BB3, he's planted a lot of vineyards in Napa Valley and in Sonoma as well. Said, yeah, of course he was the best at what he did. Why all these winemakers love your father is because he bridged the cultural gap. It was about quality. And so when you were pruning for quality or anything you were doing, it was quality. And he was able to instill and inspire the farm worker, his people, to do it. In fact, when Cesar Chavez came here when he was coming through here to try to unionize different wineries, one of the first ones he went to was at Sterling, and was welcomed at Sterling, and he was welcome. He was welcome because he wanted to hear what his workers really thought about these other opportunities, and not one person. No wineries invited the unit to come in and talk about it, but it was a great. It was great because nobody there wanted to do anything, go anywhere. My dad was a very unique opportunity in the 60s. If you think about it, in the 60s that he had, and it was inspiring. So that's what my father did. My father inspired people to do and have a reason and the purpose for doing what they did in the vineyards. And back then it was quite a feat. And so I wish he was here. He's a great guy. He's hilarious. He continues to teach me. He told our clients as we started building our management company. In 1993, we managed about 300 acres. He decided to announce his retirement in 1993. He did not retire, as far as I'm concerned, until 1997 when he stopped looking over my shoulder. And it happened. It happened in 1997. He came into my office. It was just my wife and I working, and he laid down that a black and white copy of a Golf Digest swing. I was on the phone. And my father and I, anytime we got together, we would talk to them about vineyards. It's always about vines, the season, the year, what we're doing, what adjustments you're going to make, what are you going to do. He came, sat down, and I was on the phone, and he got off the phone and he was talking about his golf swing. He retired that day. After that, we talked about golf and we talked about vineyards. It was great. 1997
was the first year you actually made wine for yourself.
That is correct.
Talked about that yet?
No, I haven't.
Good. Let's get
Talking about how much more time do I have?
So 97.
Yeah, 97 was the first time. And made that wine because I wanted to, you know, when I had experienced and seen what, especially the influence of the forefathers, the Robert Mondavis, the Justin Myers, countless others that I had experienced tasting at the table. I wouldn't taste at the table, they would sit me in the back when Chuck Wagner and Joey Wagner and a couple of the young kids would sit in the back and just hand us wine and we were not allowed to talk. You can taste but don't talk. Rightfully so. It was great to have that opportunity to do so. I wanted, and what I noticed in the room is, so we're talking about wine and we're tasting wine, but what do you got to do to get here? All that goes on in the back room, and not really a lot of glory. And it's not a lot of glory that we look for, but pride of ownership, right? Carrying all the way through. And I thought my family and the legacy, and also because my father told me when I was taking over the company, here's the most important thing. You got my last name, don't screw it up. It's my reputation, it's your reputation, it's this family's reputation. Do the right thing, always. And so, we started making some wine, all through the three-tier system. The wines that you'll be tasting today are now a new brand that we started in 2014 with a new winemaker. They're all now direct-to-consumer. We do not sell through the three-tier system. Exclusively only Pinot Noir. We made a whopping 66 cases of it, and the Bridge Cabernet made a couple hundred cases of that. And so we have been very successful in selling our wines direct. The wine from the Brown Ranch was a vineyard that was owned by Saintsbury. Saintsbury started that vineyard in 1992. And I was lucky enough, through managing and buying grapes on behalf of Ron Bauer and Frank family. So our company today, now we manage about 2,000 acres, 58 different vineyards in Napa, some in Sonoma, and Healdsburg as well. We employ about 450 employees today. I work with 54 winemakers and sell grapes from, we own and lease about 270 acres of our own properties in Napa, and we sell all of it except, there's probably 1,000 tons that comes off of it, and we keep 1.8 tons for ourselves. So we're very selective of what we'll get, a couple different rows here and there. The property in Carneros, Napa for Chardonnay and Pinot, and the property in Oakville now that we were able to be very fortunate to get our hands on a couple years ago, sell the majority of that, to small producers on purpose. We make a Tocalon vineyard wine called Desde Luisa, which is in the honor of my mother's honor, Maria Luisa, since Luisa. And the reason for that is because the success of my father, my family, the Renteria family, is because of my mother. She kept the peace between my dad and I during those 6 years when I lived at home, and there'd be times he chased me out the door, there'd be times I'd try to run away. And so my mother, God bless her soul, and so this wine is to take off from the tribute to my three kids, this also the three generations of our family, the best Verlas. So 3 pearls. And it's our pride and joy to be able to share, but it gives us an opportunity to tell this story that you don't hear about. I should also mention that we're very, very lucky to manage vineyards for a lot of wine companies, a lot of producers. We've got a great team of viticulturists and pathologists, soil chemists, and geeks. This is what I love. I didn't study it, but I learned it from my dad. And when you learn it from your dad, it's pretty interesting. I remember with some of the people that you'll know, perhaps you will as well, that's with Phil Freeze. And I remember a group of folks coming out professors coming out from UC Davis. When we walked in the vineyard and my father had his bringing shears out, nobody would put their shears out because he had mastered, especially with Andre Chalachev. He was a huge factor for my father, not only an enologist, but a viticulturist. And working with him to develop BD 1, 2, and 3 it was a gift and an opportunity that we've been very fortunate to have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Oscar. Did everybody taste already the Pinot Noir first? Brown red? Because Oscar, when he started in really 97 making wine, first started looking at different properties. You had a property, I remember the beginning up on Mount Leader. Then you had another property, and you know how it is. It's very competitive out here in Napa Valley to find vineyard or to find land and even be able to develop it. So it's been 97 has been already more than 20 years of, and working, I think when I worked at Robert Mondavi, I got to meet the Renteriers. What was really fascinating at that time was this concept of the bridge. Not only Salvador's Renteria was bridging the Mexican language or culture of the farm laborer to the enologist winemaker. In those days, winemakers never went out in the vineyards. If you wanted to make money, you were wearing a white coat and you were in a lab. You wear a big hat and walk in the vineyard. Now every winemaker tells you, oh, wine is made in the vineyard. And now you're not really a winemaker, you're a wine grower. So there's been the transition. Robert Mondavi was one of the first people to really work on grower relations and invite the grower to come and taste their wine separately and not pay just a price, pay according to different criteria. Is the wine going to the reserve? Is not? When did you water too late in the season? What other ways can we help to manage the farming to get the best quality? And depending on where your wine ended up, you had a percentage or value of the bottle. And that's really bridged this kind of, sometimes this relationship which was antagonistic between the winemaker and the wine grower. The grower wanted to grow as much grapes, and the winemaker said quality versus quantity. And but you can obviously have too low of a crop, as we've got the Henry has very low crop, 2-3 pounds an acre sometimes. So bridging that gap was very important, and Renteria farming and that whole working together with the community. And as we know, labor is a big issue today, not just immigration issue and the problems of having the Mexican worker that Bracero was going back to Mexico for a few months. Now we want to keep people all year round. That's why planting, the timing of planting and nursery work is very important. How do you keep your people here and not have in the old days labor camps like we used to have? And it's obviously labor is the big thing. What makes California unique is soil, climate, capital, because we're in a big area where there's lots of money and lots of investment, and we have labor. That's the magical notion. When you go to Bordeaux, they don't have labor anymore. Other places like Chile, they don't have the capital, they don't have the local market, they will pay a premium for wine. We're in the golden age of really California, but one of the key sort of foots of this is the quality of labor, and that's the big struggle right now for the future. So I really wanted to highlight this point.
And I want to say this, I consult in other different counties for other wine companies. I consult and oversee in other vineyard management companies in other counties for wine companies from Napa that this is our flagship winery. Have branched out. When we go to other counties and start implementing some of our work criteria, exactly what we're looking for and what we do, it is very difficult to find the labor to do it. And it's become difficult also in Napa. That's just progression, and evolution, especially as the labor force is educated, which is great. Moves into the housing industry. And I was going to say one thing about Robert Mondavi. So I remember this because in the era of the phylloxera replacement, the devastation of phylloxera here in California, so we're developing, and we were receiving new rootstocks and new clones. Robert Mondavi, if you can think about it this way, right? As far as the evolution, if you look at Napa Valley, and we're Napa Valley in comparison to some of the best regions in the world. look at its exponential growth and its success on a global map. Compare it to Burgundy and Bordeaux, because Burgundy and Bordeaux, they compare it to us. And there's grape regions everywhere all over the world. But Robert Mondavi, what he was able to do by bringing in these clones and these rootstocks of all various varieties and working and providing that information to everybody, there was no other wine company that did that. And why that was important, because he made the mistakes that we learned from. And it usually takes you about 30 years to learn a mistake in growing a vineyard and not doing it right. It takes a long time. And so, great tribute to Robert Mondavi. I tell this story all the time about people who might look at Robert Mondavi as a big wine company that's not owned by Robert Mondavi. I still grow for Robert Mondavi. In fact, from the Brown Ranch, they are going to be making a vineyard designated wine. And I do it because Mondavi, I'm a huge fan of what they've been able to do in this industry from a grape growing standpoint or wine grower standpoint to bring us to this incredible place that we've been because of his opening the doors. It's been great.
So maybe a few words about the Pinot. Did everybody reach and taste the Pinot from Brown Ranch? Some of you may have tried Sainsbury's version of that wine, because they made wine from the Brown Ranch till what year, do you remember? 2011. And then the Cabernet, obviously we wanted the Renteriers to bring a Cabernet because that's really the grape that put Napa on the map, and that his father Salvador really worked the most at in developing from the early days, as he said, is Sterling, with Andre Chelichev at BV, and with, of course, Niels Wangé, whose now son is making the wine. So I thought that was really the bridge of that continuity between two generations of father winemakers and father grape growers. I think it's something totally unique to Tres Perlas and Renteria. We're ready, I think, to take a little break. Maybe we can open it to a couple of questions, if anybody has some questions, and then we'll have a quick break, and we need to change the glassware for this wonderful historical flight. Yes, sir.
This has been a delightful, informative. This has been a delightful and informative panel, and I really thank all of you. The question, or a technical question for Ms. Martinez and Salino, regarding Berryessa area and the devastating fires that occurred there. What effect will all that smoke have on your new crop?
Myth versus reality. Media versus, it's a good question though. It's a good Napa after the fires last year. Everybody.
Very, very common question. We've even had the news contacting us and everything else regarding the fires, but truth is, this year isn't any different than the last 4 years. 2014 was the first year that I'd ever seen it. I live in Winters, about a mile away from the winery and the vineyard. And you could see the flames coming over the hill. Like that hill is not that far away, and the smoke is really bad. And I had only heard of smoke paint from Alexander Valley in 2008 and tasted those wines and was very, very scared, because I said, if you've tasted smoke paint, it's not a good thing. And I guess, long story short is, there are some key factors that all need to be in line to get smoke paint, and we don't have that this year, would be the short of the answer. But so abrasion, your skins get thinner while you're developing color and sugar. So if you get smoke on the ground level during that period of time for a period, probably I would say at least a week, and it would depend on how thick the smoke is, it would depend on what's in the smoke. But there's these glycol compounds that penetrate the skin and just stay there. And you actually can't taste them until after your fermentation is complete and you're kind of into the aging of the wine. There's this metabolic pathway that the smoke compounds kind of show up after all the aromatic, fresh fermentation compounds disappear. So I have a funny story about 2014, which we did get a little smoke paint, but I am very confident in saying that we didn't, so far so good. We're a month into harvest and we have about 2 months left, but it's looking pretty good. 2014, on the west, the furthest west portion of our vineyard, our Malbec, our prize Malbec block. So we have 3 different clones, and it's pretty steep, probably gradient of like 75 feet or something. And, you know, it was the year when we got evacuated at the winery, the road was closed. You know, I was like, can we work still? What are we supposed to do? We're harvesting. We sent some grapes off to ETS that we went through the vineyard and took these samples, and they said, you have a little bit, but, you know, from our research, you should be able to taste it. It's really low levels, so go ahead and chance it. So went ahead and picked the grapes, and sure enough, 6 months later, I freaked out because I did, you know, we're tasting the barrels of the aging wine from that year, and I tasted smoke in the finish. And it wasn't strong, but I didn't know if that just was the beginning, you know, if it was going to get worse, what was happening. And I called Corinne, who during the week works out of town and lives in Winterton Town. She said, okay, I'll be in town this weekend, we'll taste the wine. Relax. And she comes in, we taste through all the barrels of Malbec, and she said, you know, I tasted a little bit, but I actually quite like it. And so, you know, I was so concerned. I was like, are we going to have to pull this wine out? You know, it's our most popular red right now. What are we going to do? But so in that circumstance, that's my only experience. And every year it's something you have to monitor. And I've taken some classes because it's definitely a hot topic. But in terms of our wine and our winery, we're okay right now. And I'm sure a lot more research will come about because this fire stuff is not going away, unfortunately.
But that's why the winemaker works alone in the cellar. I mean, we tend to see disaster like we do in California and especially in Napa Valley, when we have the first rains that always come in the first weeks of September. In Europe, especially in Bordeaux, they say, oh, those first rains, all they do is tend to plump up the grapes. We see death and destruction, and everybody goes crazy, and then it passes. The Australians, who are the only ones who have a great deal of experience with smoke taint, because they have terrible fires every year, like they will this year, it really doesn't make a lot of difference to them. Isn't one of the finishes of really good Malbec when it's about 4 or 5 years old is that light smoke, smoky character that we all think is the smell of smoked bacon? You know, like we're having very good Rhone wines. They don't have very many fires in the Rhone Valley. So, you know, it's a question. We tend to get excited about these things. Maybe we shouldn't. You know, it's part of nature. Remember, Mark Twain used to complain about California. He said it was the only place he'd ever been in the summertime when he couldn't see anything because of the smoke.
Any other quick questions before we break, and then we'll set up, and we have these incredible wines coming up. One question here in the front.
Hi there. First, I want to thank you all so much for coming. I think this has been a really special seminar this year because it's much more, to me, a history of family in the business rather than just a history of wine or winemaking or growing. So thank you for all of you contributing that. And this question is for Oscar. How do you continue to really inspire people to stay in the vineyard? And how do you inspire people to continue the tradition of working on the land? When in this community, it being so expensive, we really lost the ability to retain the tradition of family farming. And a lot of people who are working in the vineyards are contract workers who are here for maybe a year or maybe 2, and they may not be here with their family. And to me, farming is, I grew up in a family that's been in Northern California since the 1840s in farming. And it's very sad to see the loss of family in the vineyard. So how do you inspire people to continue working in the vineyard? How do you inspire people to bring families into the vineyard and continue that tradition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say I got two answers for that. One is I see it with family farms, vineyards there's a movement from, especially in this valley. If you look at the price of vineyard land, if it is land that produces quality Cabernet, you're looking at $400,000 to $500,000 an acre for something like that. And now you look at generational. So, usually assets like these pass upon divorce, disability, or death. But here, it really is also a question about generation, whether the children of the forefathers want to take over that business or they care to take over that business. I've seen it successful, extremely successful, and I have seen it extremely fail. It's generational. There's still, and the environment is changing for marketing. So, for example, right now you're probably aware of this. It is illegal to sell wine from your property unless you have a winery permit. To have a winery permit, you have to have a winery to ferment it in a septic system. Those kind of the two. Pour the foundation, put a septic in, get some tanks, and you can do it. The process to get a winery here is extremely expensive. The ticket to do, and so if you think about being able to afford to grow grapes in Napa Valley, hopefully you own the land, and there's more than just a profit in order to keep that generational for a family. I work with a lot of families, so I still see it, but they are giving way to those that can come in here and afford and pay a lot of money for and not have to be a business, not have to be a financially sustainable. The other part about that with farm workers is that it is very difficult. Not only is it difficult because our society, specifically here in the United States, it makes it pretty difficult to want to stay here and be here and not have legal status and be recognized that way. However, the migrant farm worker, the Mexican migrant farm workers, is very strong, and their care and their need in California specifically, maybe other places, 80% of the revenue and profits that are sent back to Mexico. 80%. So they know how to live in a way where they supply it. So there is still a great need for farm workers to take care of their families because they have that family feeling. And how do we keep them employed? Say 4 or 5 years ago, I got my butt handed to me because I wasn't really paying attention to the amount of labor contractors that were coming in Napa and the quality of work. What's been a saving grace for me in Napa Valley and for my fellow vineyard managers is if you cherish culture. And it sounds, because we talk about culture, it's a big deal, right? It's gratitude and appreciation, the things you do for the people you do it for. 4 years ago, we started a farm worker concierge service. I'm on the board of the Napa Community Foundation. We have a pathway to citizenship. We have, in the last 2 years, in Napa County, this is not just farm workers, provided for these about 1,100 citizenships in Napa Valley. We do programs for nonprofits to give them access to those because they're there. They just don't know how to access and which ones to access. Everything from when they come, they don't have the right boots, socks, shirts. You give it to people. You show people that you care, and that's how you become an employer of choice. And for our company, it's been a saving grace because we have a surplus of labor. We can now go to wine companies. We're not cheap. We're pretty expensive because we pay our employees at the highest premium. I take money out of the equation because I like to pay people 20% above market. That's how I take money out of the equation. And then to give people pride of ownership, it is a difficult thing to do, the most difficult thing, but at the end of the day, that is the most rewarding thing for everybody. So we're on that journey, and Napa has that ability with its economy. I don't think any place in the Bay Area, anywhere you are, it's expensive to live here. It's not just Napa. Traffic and housing, it's a problem. Hopefully they'll have flying cars here pretty soon that will save us. Do the right thing.
Yeah, so I wanted to add something briefly about labor and our guys and some of the family farming. We have three different sort of father-son combinations working with us in our vineyard, and at our vineyard we have 11 full-time vineyard employees. Those 11 guys have worked with us for an average of 23 years this year, so some of them have been here 40 plus. Some of them are pretty old, but that's been our approach to it, and we, partly because of the property we have and the range of grapes that we have, we keep our guys employed year round, and that helps them live here, and most of them, Napa now is a very expensive place, but a lot of that's fairly recent, and most of our guys own homes here in Napa as well, so that's the way it's worked for us. But we all see that there are more labor issues coming, but the guys that work with us are a very important part of what we do.
I want to tell you one thing really quick about this. In the last 5 years here, the reason that we have still been successful in most of California is because of females. In Napa specifically, it's been estimated that maybe 6-7 years ago, 3 to 5% of our workforce in the vineyards were females. It's up to 40% now. My company is 45%. Very meticulous about the work, great to work with, great attitude. The men don't have a great attitude, Gio. Women are saving our grape industry.
And in fact, the history is very rich. Women winemakers, and as you know, some of the great vintages in France, 1945, we call it the women's vintage because men were at the war and women did all the work. It was one of the best there. Plenty to do that. So we're going to have this very quick break where you can enjoy the Nvwl Museum Francis Holbrook's collection. Bring your bag or something so the staff can come really quickly. We're going to clear all these glasses, reset a new mat and another glass. We're going to try and do this in about 15 minutes. So thank you for pulling in your chairs.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. What a full day, what an amazing day, and we're going to top it off with some wines that I'm very excited to taste, and thanks again, Darryl, 40 Brothers, for inspiring this tasting, and it's given us lots of ideas for other types of tasting along these themes, and especially sourcing some of these. One of the wines, we only had 3 bottles, and we were able to make it all around. Maybe Darryl, if you really like these wine, Darryl has a stash here, or 2 at 40 Brothers. If you make it to 40 Brothers, you never know, but we were talking about different styles of the mission, or how, what is useful when you're in a new world and you want a wine to last. And there's a long history of fortified wines in the world, from Madeira, which America, what was the wine? Oh, I'm going to see if I get corrected by Darryl. What was the wine that was used for the toast of the Declaration of Independence? Madeira, correct, good. There's an amazing tradition of you named the wine by the boat it came on in Savannah and the East Coast. Wines are fragile and traveling is difficult, so they oxidize, we have microbial problems, we have bacterial yeast problems. So one way to protect the wine, and the British Navy learned that early on, especially where Napoleon located all the ports during the Napoleonic Wars of England, they went further south to Portugal and created port as an export wine for the UK by adding this fortified spirit. We think that the first fortified wines were made first before in Spain, maybe by Arnaud de Villanova, when the Arabs, the Moors, invaded Spain. What year was that, Darryl? I'm going to get the wrong date.
711.
711, and they ruled Spain for until 1492. They brought the art of distillation because they would distill plants, medicinals. They were a very advanced culture, both literary and in health. And the pot still is known as an al-albiq from the Arabic. And of course, what does it mean? That's for you to answer.
We know about
We know about distillation from the Arabs. The Arabs got it from the Chinese. But Gilles just used the word, alambic. What is the alambic? It was used for distilling antimony, which was used for coloring your eyelashes, for coloring your eyes.
Oh, it's women are so important again.
Yes. Yes.
So, of course, distillation, and in the south of France, you may have had some of the Bagnols or Maury. These were the original, they were fortified wines made before the British came up with port. But Madeira, this great island on the trading routes, and how the wine evolved, and as it was taken around the world and crossed the equator a couple of times. You may have tasted Marsala, which is hopefully going to make a comeback. And of course, the original wines of sherry. This is a fortification after you've fermented the wine dry and you add a little mistel. You can ferment on the skin during the fermentation and stop the fermentation by adding this grape spirit. It could be beet spirit, it could be a spirit from other spirits. And that's how port is made, when you drain off the wine and you actually fortify off the skins. The wines of France are fortified on the skins, and some of the muscats are fortified on the skins. The Muscat de Bourg de Venise, I don't know if you've had it. And then there's this other tradition, which is what we call a vin doux naturel, which is where you actually add pure grain spirit straight to ferment, to juice. Pinot de Charente is an example of that. And there are different rules of how you're supposed to do things in California due to this. And we're going to taste through these 4 wines that Daryl knows very well, and he'll tell us how they're made and how the transitions and the different styles of fortification and the story behind Angelica. So welcome to our second half before lunch, Daryl.
Good. Angelica is a California wine. It's probably the only California wine. There are people from Portugal, especially from the Azores, who say, well, we make Angelique. That's the name that they stole from California. Because Angelica is found nowhere else except in California. In Australia, they make a wine which used to be called Tokay, Rutherglen Tokay, which is made out of Muscadel de Bordelais, and now it has to be called Topac. It's a stupid name, because they can't call it Tokay anymore. But those are wines made by the addition of alcohol. The traditional recipe for the production of Angelica is actually found in Bob Thompson, who lives in St. Helena, in his book for Sunset Magazine called California Wine, a Sunset Pictorial. He's the only one who's come out with the original recipe, but it's already a late recipe, because this one is from 1891, from Émile Vacher, who is one of the owners of a wine company in Cucamonga called Padre Wine Company. The translation for Angelica: the best production procedure for obtaining a wine that clarifies rapidly and naturally. The best must to use is one which measures 26% sugar. If the must from Missions, the best grape and the only one that should be used for this product, measures 28 or 30, bring it back down to 26 by adding some must from Burger. How many of you know what Burger is? A white grape variety that practically doesn't exist anymore in California. It used to be the base for California Riesling. Let the must rest in an open tank from about 12 to 20 hours. If the temperature is not too high, then run it into a fortifying tank, taking care not to get any of the cap already formed on the liquid. The essential point is not to allow fermentation to start in the must being used. By fortifying before fermentation spoils it, which for what it's worth is against United States law. This is a comment made by Bob. One contains Angelica of 20% alcohol and 14% sugar. This will be perfectly clear 4 months after its production. A must of 25% sugar yields an Angelica of 13% sugar. So that's the basic regulation for the production of Angelica. When in the 60s, the Wine Institute came out with a whole series of descriptions for wine judging in California. Professor Maynard Amory came out with most of these descriptions, and he actually says in one of them, Angelica should be tawny in color, smooth, but not have any muscat character, because it was too easy to actually make a light muscat wine and call it Angelica. So wineries needing to expand their shelf space would simply take muscat, add something else to it like a white port, and call it Angelica. The only real Angelicas that we have here are the first two, which are made using fortification. The last two wines are wines that are not made with alcoholic fermentation. They are made with a syrup fermentation. And the syrup fermentation is a technology that was used only by one winery, by Harbor Winery in West Sacramento. It was owned by a very old friend of mine who started in 1972, and it closed 4 years ago. The last wine, the 1986 Mission del Sol, and it's called Mission del Sol because of a wine that I had made here in Napa Valley. At Stony Hill, the McRae's grew a little bit of Semillon. The Semillon that they grew, they would sell as grapes for sugar to Christian Brothers. The McRae's and I, and several other couples, had a small wine tasting group. It was called the Chateau Grillé group, because Fred McRae had never tasted Chateau Grillé, which is made out of Viognier. So I said, well, I can show you that. I've got some bottles of it. And then I said, but do you know there's another wine that's made in the Rhone Valley that's called Vin de Paille, straw wine? And he said, I've never heard of that. He said, well, how do you make that? He said, well, they take Marsanne and Roussanne, and they put them on mats, straw mats, and they just let them wither until the winter, and they press them in the winter time. So he said to me, could we do that with Semillon? I said, sure. So from 1969, the first vintage of Semillon du Soleil from Stony Hill was 1968, which we never sold. They kept it. They made one demijohn. In 1969, they made the production of this vineyard by taking the grapes, putting them on prune trays, and then laying the prune trays in the drive in front of their house for 3 days so they would be sunned. Then they were crushed, fermented. The fermentation stuck all the time, and it would be sterile filtered because Fred didn't want to have any re-fermenting wine because it had about 10% sugar. It had 13% alcohol and 10% sugar. I think they still sell it, but from 1969 until 1982, Cordy Brothers was the only source for Stony Hill's Semillon du Soleil, which came packed in little six bottle boxes, wooden boxes, and the first bottles were unique because they were old California flint glass bottles that had punts in them. Fred had found someone who had them, and he bought all of them, and we used them until they were used up. Harbor Winery tasted this wine, and they said, well, Charles asked me, he said, well, could I use the name? I said, sure. So he made this Mission del Sol, which theoretically should mean that the wine would be sunned. The wine was never sunned. It was just picked at very high sugar. So when we start to look at these things, if you want to take I'll read you just a couple of passages from Professor William Cruce's book, The Principles and Practice of Winemaking. and it's natural wines of high alcohol content. The present scarcity of alcohol for all purposes has occasioned recent interest on the part of some winemakers in producing dessert wines of high alcohol content by natural fermentation. This was just after World War II, it was 1947. In fortifying wines and must with high-proof brandy, the natural extract is materially diluted, and the brandy usually contains some of the harsh constituents of all distilled alcohols. If subsequent aging is long enough, the harshness of the newly fortified wine ameliorates. Wines made without fortification have less of this harshness. Syrup fermentation of must. Owing to the temporarily high tax on fortified brandy in 1915, so before Prohibition, there was considerable interest in producing wines of high alcohol content before fortification, and also in making such wines not to be fortified. An investigation made in 1915 and reported in 1916, Cruz, Brown, and Fossfelder, three professors from Berkeley, where all of this work was done. Unfortified sweet wines of high alcohol content was conducted on syruped fermentation of grape must. The procedure consisted in fermenting lightly sulfided must with pure yeast to 0 or 5 degrees boiling rates. Adding a small amount of grape concentrate, fermenting to low boiling again, adding concentrate, and fermenting again. The cycle being repeated until fermentation gauged to give a final sugar content within the desired range. Several of the wines attained more than 18% alcohol, and one reached 20%. Advantages of syrup fermentation. Wines made with syrup fermentation have much higher non-sugar extract concentrate or content than those made by the usual fortification procedure. What were they interested in? They were interested in wines that had a great deal of body. So, the first two wines are in fact classic Angelica, which is wine where grapes are crushed, the must is severed, hopefully fermentation doesn't begin, and the wine is then fortified. It's then allowed to age. The first one is made by Marco Capelli, who used to be the winemaker at Swanston, and he tasted this Angelica by having tasted the wines from Harbor Winery, because he would be invited to the Rose House very often, and they would actually serve this wine as a dessert wine. So he said, how could we do that? There was no mission for him to buy here. So he actually started buying mission juice from Amador County. So this is the first one. It's about 10, 11 years old. But this is a wine made by fortification. So taste this wine. Taste this one.
And Marco couldn't be here. He actually, so as Daryl said, he was the winemaker 17 years for Clark Swanson. He's not here either, and he still consults for Swanson and still makes Angelica for Swanson. They originally made a wine for the Mission Dolores in San Francisco as a gift, as a fundraiser. And then they found out the mission was not allowed to sell the wine because they didn't have a permit. So they got stuck with this wine, and they worked with Nina Weems, another historian, on this Angelica project. And this, I think he has even, you have this wine? I don't think he's released this wine yet. This wine has not been released, and I was able to get hold of it before he took off to Italy for a year sabbatical about a month ago. And he was able to send us some of these bottles, age 11 years. It hasn't been released yet.
You notice the color. The color has a red tint because he ferments the crushed grapes and then fortifies, extract color from the skins, much like we make pork. This wasn't the way the wine was intended to be made. It was always intended to be a tawny wine, and it takes a long time for the pigment to drop out. You have to keep it for a very long time in wood, or you move it quite a bit, in order for the pigment to change from red to tawny. The second wine is a wine that's a very old wine, bottled by Galliano Winery. Don Galliano is the last working winery in Cucamonga. And he has enormous quantities of old wines, sherry, port, angelica, that he bottles from time to time. He also makes terrific vinegar. His winery, literally, is behind the airport at Ontario. Since 1970, I've been going to Ontario to taste at the Los Angeles County Fair, both as a wine taster and for the last 10 years I've been the head of the olive oil tasting for the Los Angeles County Fair. When I first arrived in 1970, when you looked out from the plane, landing in Ontario, the only thing you could see were vine stumps, because all of the area had at one time been 3,500 acres of vineyard owned by the Italian Vineyard Company, a man whose name was Secondo Guasti. That's why they named the little village Guasti. This wine is the remnant of that extraordinary history which we don't think about anymore, but which, as I said before, is the basis for the creation of the California wine industry. It started there. It starts in Los Angeles. The original shield of the city of Los Angeles is in fact a grape cluster. It was called Los Angeles, the City of Vines. So this is a very old, we've had the wine probably for 10 years. We don't have it anymore, you guys are drinking it. This is the bottling that we bought 10 years ago, but this is an example of the wine kept in glass for a very long time. Notice the color, it was always brown. It wasn't a wine with this red tint. It was always brown, because that was the color. Amory's strictures, it should be tawny in color. But this is an example of the fortified style.
You can feel the texture, and I know some of you may have had, Tony ports when you get to 20 or 30 years, or maybe some more Madeira style of wines would have this texture. How old do you think this was aged in barrel before they put it in glass?
This has probably been 10, 12 years in barrel, and literally it may have actually come because Don Galliano bought the wines that were the remnants of enormous wines kept in tanks like these that were from Brookside Winery. How many of you remember Brookside Winery? The Bien families, one of the old French families that came to California that made wine in Southern California. They had a winery still in Cucamonga. The cellars were underground. So if you can imagine where the windows are, that was ground level. This is where their cellars were. So the cellars were kept cool, not cold, cool. But they had this extraordinary supply of old fortified wines. This is probably some wine from that. So this wine could probably have wines in it that are more than 60 or 70 years old. Because Brookside went out of business in the early 80s.
And that brings the question of, when you're aging these wines, sometimes, as you said, you can speed up the aging through oxidation, through aeration or racking or not filling up. Obviously, in certain parts of the world, like Madeira, the influence of temperature. You can have really hot days, or when you talk about Aceto Balsamico, which you know a lot about, has an effect on aging. And then in France, sometimes when you put them in glass, they put the glass bottles out in the sun as well, in this ratio, to develop this ratio. And any of the techniques used in these wines that you know?
These two wines were made, all four of the wines were made without any of this technology. What's curious is that we use this technology in this area, in Sonoma. Because when August Sebastiani was still alive, I remember going to see him because I wanted to buy some old fortified wines, and they had enormous stocks of fortified wine. Some of them were kept in the cellar in Sonoma. Some were kept outside of the cellar, along the winery building, along the railroad tracks, because there was a spur at Sebastiani Winery, and they were kept in wood. This type of aging in wood with barrels out in the sun used to produce very interesting flavors. It made the wines mature very rapidly, but it had one detrimental fact. Wood borers light the sun, the oak, and the alcohol, because the alcohol had sugar in it. So they were constantly having to repair the barrels by plugging the holes with little pieces of wood, pounding them in. So you had these heads of barrels where the end staves would leak. And it was a terrible problem for the California wine industry. But that's how part of the wines actually were matured, because they matured much more rapidly. You know, if you take a wine and you keep it in a cellar like this, it's cool and dark, the wines age slowly. If you put them outside, they age a lot faster. And if you put them in the sun, as they do in Banyuls and Maori, in these big bonbons, the sun, because the wines there are made with Grenache, the wines are actually red when they're made. They're fortified. The color precipitates, so you have the color falling, and the wines actually become pale in color. They become pale tawny color, sort of like the 1976 Mission. That's that color.
So both of these are from the Mission grape, for sure?
These are both, all of them are from Mission grape.
Okay.
These are all four from Mission grapes. However, the difference between the first two and the second two is just the technique of fermentation. The second two are the only wines made in contemporary California winemaking that were made using syrup fermentation. What was used was very clean, fresh concentrate made in Lodi at 60 brix that was added instead of adding alcohol. So, the 1976 wine, since I have Charles's cellar books, I can tell you all of this. 1976 Mission del Sol, October 23, received 6,500 pounds Mission grapes from Ken Deaver, Amador County, at 29 volume. Acid, 0.4. You cannot make a stable wine with 0.4 acid, 0.4 acid. Yield approximately 530 gallons. Added 6,360 grams of tartaric acid to raise acid to 0.7. Fine flavor. Good clean juice, added 500 grams of potassium bisulfite. November 15, okay, so you've got October 23rd, the grapes were crushed. November 15, 9 degrees boiling, added 31 gallons of concentrate. It measured 12 boiling at the top of the fermenter and 16 boiling at the bottom. Why? Come on, those of you interested in making wine. Why?
Solids, the sugar solids.
Very good, very good. Concentrate is very heavy. Plof, it went right to the bottom. November the 16th, 14.5 boiling at top. December 1, added 15 gallons concentrate plus 60 gallons of unfortified wine. So the dry wine, just fermented. Initial boiling, 8.5. December 2nd, boiling, 7 degrees at top, 10 at bottom. December 3rd, racked off gross lees into puncheons, 160 gallon, 115 gallon, 2 sixes, 482 gallons plus one 59-gallon unfortified wine. January 31st, 77. Racked, added 15 grams potassium metabisulfite. August 25th, 1977. Racked, added 15 grams of metabisulfite. May 29, 78. Racked wine into main cellar and added 30 grams of potassium metabisulfite per 50-gallon barrel. August 18, 1978. So now we're talking about 2 years later. Racked wine plus 15 grams sodium metabisulfite per barrel. March the 3rd, 1979. Filtered wine and added 15 sodium metabisulfite per 50-gallon cask. March 17, wine was bottled. It went to places like Calvert's Wine Shop in Washington, D.C., to Red Carpet Liquor in Pasadena, Draper and Esquin in San Francisco, Robbins of Woodside in Woodside, the Chronicle Restaurant in Pasadena, High Time, Scandia Restaurant, Chez Panisse, Pronto number 7. Who knows what the Pronto markets were? Trader Joe's. Trader Joe bought the wine because they had tasted the wine in Los Angeles. Then there's also one here of, I think it's here, Avery's. Avery's of Bristol, who the wine was sold in England. That's the 1976. This has been in bottle ever since. So the difference between the 76 and the 86, in spite of their 10-year difference, is that this was bottled after 3 years, in its 3rd year. This was bottled 29 years later. The 86 was made, the grapes cost $726.52 for 4.185 tons. That means that they cost $181.63 a ton. They came from Story Vineyard in Amador County, not Deaver, because when Charles wanted to buy the wine from the grapes from Deaver in 1982, Deaver said, well, you're going to have to pay the same price I sell the grapes to Sutter Home for, because Deaver sold all of his grapes to Sutter Home, and at that time they were going for $2,300 a ton. The first time Charles made this wine in 1972, the grapes cost $75 a ton. Received 87 30 pounds of grapes from Story Vineyard. Juice yield 700 gallons. Boiling 28 degrees, acid 0.308. Pressed juice into stainless steel tank number 3, added 600 grams K2S 205. November 9th, added 990 grams of tartaric acid to raise acid to approximately 0.7. Added 2 pounds of yeast food and 1.5 pounds activated dry champagne yeast. November 18th, boiling about 10 degrees, added 50 gallons of concentrate. Boiling was raised to 13.75. November 21st, boiling was at 7.5, added 53 gallons of concentrate, 11 degrees at the top, 14 degrees at the bottom. December the 8th, added 55 gallons of concentrate, raising it to 12.25. December the 14th, barreled wine, produced 872 gallons. January 20th, 87, added alcohol test 15.7. June 27, 87, alcohol 15 question mark. July 26, 87, red wine into 18 50-gallon plus barrels, added 20 grams of K2S205 per barrel. The remainder of this wine were 14 barrels that when they were bottled were half full, because Charles had stopped taking care of this wine because it didn't sell very well. So literally, this is the last vintage he made. The alcohol on 76 is 18 degrees. The alcohol on the 86 is 23.9, only by evaporation. So if you want to make a very concentrated wine, you either make it concentrated or you let it sit, and it gets concentrated. 86 was bottled in 2014.
You have some available?
Yes, we still have this available. It costs $39.99 a bottle. It's a relic of California wine production because it won't exist ever again.
Can you talk a little bit about, because when I went to your store, I believe I bought a Zinfandel that you had made for the 50th or 60th anniversary of the creation of Cordy Brothers.
No.
Which is a
The
big...
Zinfandel that you bought was made in 2015. 2015 was the 50th anniversary of the tasting or the making of that wine, which was made by this wine by Charles Myers from Deaver Vineyard, which we drank, Charles, myself, and Bob Trinchero, we drank in May of 1968 in Deaver's Vineyard, which is what made Bob Trinchero actually decide to go to Amador County to buy grapes. So 2011 is in fact the 50th anniversary of the production of Zinfandel at Sutter Home.
And they were the first to actually put the Amador County on the label. As you know, Gallo, other people were buying away. When Davi started in Lodi too, in Woodbridge, a lot of people were not sort of upfront about the sourcing of grape until label laws changed in California.
They called it California, but because in 1968 there was one winery in Amador County, which was D'Agostini Winery, and there were two major buyers of grape variety, of grapes from Amador County. One was Gallo, the other was Christian Brothers. The other grapes were sold to home winemakers in Oakland and San Francisco. And that was the major sale of wine from Amador County, was in fact to home winemakers.
Can you tell the story about the label on that wine? Thank you.
The label of the wine, that is this 2015 wine, has a painting on it, which is a painting by Wayne Thiebaud, and it's called A Man Reading. The man reading is Charles Myers, because they were colleagues at Sacramento City College, and it was painted probably in 1961, because Wayne left City College in 1962 and went to Davis to become professor of art. He was instructor in art at Sacramento City College, so he painted this picture. And when we made this wine, because I had the wine made at another winery, Andis Winery, and I gave them the recipe that was used for the wine. Because the wine was made in glass demijohns, picked very low sugar, and it had only 13 alcohol, which is unheard of for Amador County. So when I said to the winemaker at Andis, "Can you make this?" He said, "Sure." So he made the wine. When we bottled the wine, which the original wine was bottled in September, after or in August, before the harvest in September, the year following, so in 1966, She bottled the wine at the same time. It was bottled on the 1st of September of 2016. So it was only 1 year involved. Part of the wine was kept in wood, part of the wine was kept in tote bags, in flexible bags, to imitate the making of the wine using the demijohns. So we still have that wine for sale, but Wayne gave us permission to use his label, or his painting on the label, and the painting was just used because it's 50 years from the time the man who was depicted on in the painting made his first wine, which was in fact the rebirth of Amador County winemaking. Because in 1970, then Montevina arrives, is created in Amador County, and that's the second winery in Amador County. So, the 1986, we bottled, after Charles died, he dies in 1985. So I was asked by his daughter, who owns the winery, now it's being used by another winery, we'll just bottle the wine. So the wine was bottled as Charles would have bottled the wine. It was simply, all the casks were drained, it was put into a stainless steel tank, it was settled, and it was bottled by a gravity-filled 6-spout filler. So no SO2, no acid adjustment, no nothing. With the empty barrels, we then took the barrels up to Amador County, and there was a distillery, it's not there any longer, there was a distillery in Jackson, and they filled the barrels up with bourbon. So we sold 3 bottlings of 7-year-old and 8-year-old bourbon, finished in the Mission barrels. And the label used to say, Mission Barrel Enhanced Whiskey, Cordy Brothers Whiskey. Not even bourbon, because then it becomes too complicated. We don't have any more of this. We do have gin, put in the same barrels, which is very interesting. Very interesting gin. It's very pale plum color. So, there you are. Any questions? Yes?
So, the 86 had 23 something alcohol, but then you bottled it probably less than 20, didn't you? Did you lower the alcohol?
Nothing was done to it.
So you had to pay a lot more tax on those than you would
Yes.
normally, right?
Over 14% alcohol, you pay more tax. But you have to pay, you can't make a wine that's over 24% alcohol. This is 23.
24,
I think you'll be allowed to, I suggest keeping your favorite glass and bringing it to lunch to have it with dessert, or keep enjoying it. Because I know the chef in a few minutes, we have to be there in 5 minutes if we have another question or two, but it's such an amazing tasting. Well, they're very different in style. I mean, I enjoyed the 86. I think that was my favorite in texture, aroma, flesh. It's a bit unfair to taste only an 11-year-old wine next to a 40-year-old wine next to. But what's important is that Daryl has saved these wines from extinction. And then there's still somebody, and there's somebody like Marco Capelli, who made Merlot really famous, worked with André Champion, did this Alexis bottling, did a lot of things to go back to the Sierras and keep going making this wine. In a way, in tradition in Italy, maybe people were making, Vino Santo. There's always a tradition of Amarone.
Actually, there was a small production of Vino Santo made here by the winemaker, the former winemaker here, Scott McLeod, because he used to work in Tuscany, and he brought back the mother for making Vino Santo, but which never got off the ground because it takes too much time. And in California, if nothing else, we want to make things quickly. And some wines you cannot make quickly. So, I will tell you something else. It's not available yet, but we are making a Madeira type wine out of Verdelho, because the Verdelho that we have in California is in fact Verdelho da Madeira. And Verdelho Madeira makes a semi-dry wine, sort of soup type wine. And I have convinced a winery now in Acampo, it's a winery called Dancing Coyote, who makes Verdelho, grows Verdelho grapes. I asked them if they would make a Verdelho wine using their grapes, made as if the wine were made the way Madeira used to be made at its highest level, which is a wine called a canteiro wine, C-A-N-T-E-I-R-O. Canteiro in Portuguese means scantlings. You know, the things that are underneath these barrels, those are scantlings. So the canteiro wines were wines that were put in wood and then not baked. They were simply put in a warm room. So I asked them, do you have a place to actually do this? And they said, oh yeah. And since the winery itself is the old Barengo winery at Acampo, they have an outbuilding which is a storage facility. So it's open to the elements. It gets cold in the winter, it gets hot in the summer. So we have 10 barrels using the old barrels of this wine to age the wine in. But so the temperature goes up and down. The barrels aren't topped, they're just allowed to sit there. And they've been sitting there now for 3 years. So we'll taste them next year and see if the wines are any good. If they are, we'll bottle some of them. And we can say we have Verdelho, Canteiro Verdelho, made like Madeira used to be made. Very little Madeira is made like that today. Most Madeira is made by putting it into a cement tank where there's coils of hot water that go through the tank, and the wine is baked that way, and then it's aged. If this is a wine that would be a vintage wine without any artificial baking, just letting the wine get old. There was a very famous Madeira Angelica made here in Napa Valley that was made by Joe Heitz, and it was called Cellar Treasure Angelica. That wine he found at a winery called Bear Mountain Winery in Delano, California, that was on top of their sherry bakers. Because remember, when I said in 1955 we made 35 million gallons of this kind of wine, people did all sorts of things to make the wine get old. So they had put barrels of a wine made out of a table grape called Black Manaka. It's a raisin variety, and that was the wine that Joe Heitz bottled in brown liter bottles. So he would sell it only in California, and it was called Cellar Treasure Angelica. I think that's the last Angelica that Heitz made. There hasn't been a lot of Angelicas made in Napa Valley. In fact, even in this winery, historically, there was never an Angelica. There was sherry and port, but no Angelica. That I've never seen any of labels of Angelica. So, there you are.
And we're close to the end, so you know how to get hold of Daryl if you want some of this wine. Remember, you also have this form for entry. If you wanted any of that very rare, the only still wine mission made available just today. You have a form in your thing, you can fill it up and give it to Mike at lunch. And if I will be there having lunch, and we can mingle and ask if you have other questions. But I think the chef is ready for us. So thank you, Daryl, for bringing these incredible wines.
Thank you.
The only left panelist standing is the young man who's grafted Mission Vine onto his Cabernet Franc Napa. So there's a future for Mission. Looking forward to it.
I don't think in Napa Valley. I don't think in Napa Valley. Maybe outside of Napa Valley. I'll put this someplace. Do not steal it. But this is the book written in Spanish. It has some rather interesting photographs of Camilo Magoni, who has his own winery now. But the photographs are very interesting because there are still producers of wine in Baja California who make wine as it was made in the mission period. So for all of those people who say they want to make natural wine, you cannot get any more natural than those, because they're trodden in hide containers. They're held up on a framework. You simply trod the grapes, and then one of the legs of this skin of a cow has a stopper in it, and that's what's used to drain the tank of the juice, and then the juice is just fermented in containers. What I forgot to tell you was, even when we talked about the wines of the mission period, they were making wines under a great handicap until they came to California. Because in Baja California, there is no wood, so they had no barrels. What did they ferment in? They fermented in ceramic pots that had been left by the Manila galleon, which actually went to Baja California on its way from Manila to Mexico City. It was once a year. It came from Manila and left from Manila going back, from Mexico going back. They actually used ceramic pots, which is what they used to keep wine in. So you can imagine there was nothing to even seal the pots with. Because normally when you have an open vessel like this, you need to put something on it. Well, there was no saran wrap. In Baja California, curiously enough, they have a tree which has a bark, which they call the cork tree. It's not cork oak, it's another tree, which they could take the bark off and use it as a stopper. But they were really hindered by the fact that there was no wood to keep wine in. It was kept in pots. That's why the wine was either more or less good. It's when the missionaries came to California, then they could actually, because the provisions came from Mexico by ship, they actually brought barrels. So we have now the production of wine in barrels rather than the production of wine in ceramic pots. So, thank you very much.